Sit back, relax, and let's take a look at this new video. This should help you ease your anxiety. You do not begin with the thunder of cannons or the roar of jet engines tearing the sky. That would be too obvious, too loud, too late. War never announces itself with fanfare, not in the beginning. The first signs arrive as whispers, so faint you almost mistake them for background noise. A headline here, a speech there, a satellite drifting silently into a higher orbit. The world keeps turning, markets keep trading, children keep walking to school, and yet something beneath the surface hums with tension, like the faint vibration before a storm splits the air. Preparation is the first language of war, and every country speaks it fluently. You can feel it if you look closely enough. Shipyards that once produced merchant vessels now churn out destroyers. Warehouses fill with grain, fuel, and medical supplies. Quiet insurance policies against the chaos of tomorrow. Politicians, smiling under bright lights, speak carefully crafted half-truths, their words dipped in diplomacy, their meanings sharpened in private rooms. They promise peace, but their budgets say otherwise. The military build-up is constant, measured not in days but in decades, and it accelerates when the air thickens with unease. Wars do not start because someone suddenly decides they want one. Wars start because the ground has been tilled for years, because suspicion has grown unchecked, because alliances stretch thin under their own weight. They begin with silence, with preparation, with a kind of paranoid patience. It is the silence of governments quietly increasing defense spending while preaching restraint. The silence of factories retrofitted to produce both tractors and tanks, depending on tomorrow's orders. The silence of soldiers drilling at dawn, their boots echoing across empty fields, practicing maneuvers for wars their leaders swear will never come. The whisper is everywhere if you know how to listen. Satellites reposition over contested seas, their lenses drinking in every ship, every harbor, every flicker of light on a runway. Drones test the edges of foreign airspace, sometimes pulled back, sometimes shot down, their wreckage becoming tomorrow's headline. Nuclear arsenals are not dismantled, only modernized, dressed up with sleek new delivery systems and cloaked in the language of deterrence. Cyber armies grow in secret, hacking infrastructure, probing power grids, mapping out what a digital battlefield might look like. A city far away loses power for an hour. A bank collapses under a mysterious breach. An airport goes dark for reasons officials struggle to explain. Each event is written off as an accident, yet every intelligence agency quietly files it under potential prelude. The whisper does not sound like war. It sounds like defense budgets debated in parliaments. It sounds like new aircraft carriers christened with champagne and headlines about national pride. It sounds like a politician insisting that missiles are merely defensive systems. It sounds like silence in the moments between official statements. And it sounds like the scraping of pens, signing contracts with defense companies, billions of dollars sealed in ink, securing weapons that may never be used, unless they are. History teaches us that whispers matter. Before World War I, it was the mobilization of troops in Europe. Each movement answered with another, each whisper becoming louder until the continent found itself engulfed in fire. Before World War II, it was the steady rearmament of Germany, dismissed at first, tolerated next, and only resisted when the whisper had already become a roar. During the Cold War, it was not bombs falling but satellites rising, each one a signal that preparation was survival, that readiness itself was a form of deterrence. And now, in the present, the pattern repeats. Nations do not shout their intent, they whisper their readiness. Trade wars mask military posturing, border skirmishes mask larger ambitions. The global order looks calm, but calm is deceptive. Calm is the surface of the ocean, while underneath currents twist and collide, dragging ships toward storms they cannot see. You walk through a city and it feels normal. Shops are open. The streets are crowded. Teenagers laugh into glowing phones. Yet look harder and the signs are there. Cameras on the lampposts, tracking faces. Emergency alerts tested on your phone. Police in armored vehicles patrolling protests with military precision. Beneath the surface of civilian life lies a framework designed for rapid transformation. Cities that can be militarized within hours. Communication systems that can be rerouted to command centers. Ordinary citizens who may one day be told to stockpile food, water, and trust. The whisper lives in you too. You scroll past headlines about defense treaties, naval exercises, joint training missions, barely registering them. The language is technical, the tone reassuring, but the meaning is simple. We are preparing. The whisper reaches you in gas prices, in shortages of rare minerals, in subtle changes to supply chains. Nations build arsenals not only of weapons, but of resources, because a war is fought not just with bullets, but with bread, not just with tanks, but with fuel. Preparation is everywhere. In the deserts where missiles are tested, in the Arctic where submarines glide beneath melting ice, in space where satellites crowd the sky like silent predators, in cyberspace where viruses spread not to steal money, but to map vulnerabilities. Even the oceans, vast and ancient, are carved into territories, every shipping lane mapped, every choke point studied. It is tempting to believe that preparation guarantees safety, that armies drill only so they never have to fight, that nuclear weapons are built only to prevent their use. But the whisper carries with it a darker truth. Preparation can become prophecy. The more nations prepare, the more they expect conflict. And the more they expect conflict, the more likely they are to create it. The whisper before the storm is not one voice, but many. It is the US Navy steaming through the South China Sea. It is China building islands from reefs, staking claims mile by mile. It is Russia staging exercises along borders, tanks rolling across open fields to remind the world they can. It is smaller nations, too, arming themselves not out of ambition, but out of fear, stockpiling weapons because they cannot afford to trust promises of peace. It is alliances tightening like knots, treaties drafted and redrafted, each one written in the language of cooperation, but fueled by suspicion. There is no single villain in the whisper. Every country justifies its actions as defensive, as necessary, as reluctant, and perhaps they are right. Yet when everyone prepares for defense, the world becomes armed for offense. The whisper grows louder, the hum of engines at distant bases, the thunder of boots on parade grounds, the click of new satellites locking into orbit. This is the paradox of modern peace. It exists because every country prepares for war. A balance held not by goodwill, but by fear. A quiet truce, maintained not by trust, but by readiness. You cannot hear it unless you listen closely, but once you do, the sound is everywhere. The sound of the storm gathering. And here lies the truth that unsettles you most. Wars rarely begin with trumpets. They begin with whispers. They begin in warehouses filled with grain, in factories producing drones, in politicians rehearsing speeches about defense, while secretly planning escalation. They begin in the silence between headlines, in the careful glance between diplomats, in the shadow of satellites watching from above. One day, the whisper may become a roar, but for now, it is only a hum beneath daily life. The whisper before the storm, the sound of every country preparing just in case. You do not need to look far back in history to understand that war has always been with us. It is stitched into the story of humanity like a dark thread that refuses to be pulled free. Long before there were nations, before flags or borders, or generals in decorated uniforms, there were clans, tribes, and families defending themselves with sharpened stones and fire-hardened spears. The instinct to fight, to protect, to conquer, to survive at the expense of another group is ancient. It is not a modern invention. It is older than writing, older than kingdoms, older than even the myths that tried to explain why people kill one another. When you imagine the first conflict, it is not the clash of great armies, but the sudden scramble at the edge of a riverbank where two groups meet and only one leaves with the water rights. It is a hunter returning to his cave to find strangers inside, claiming the fire he made, the food he gathered. It is an ambush in the dark, the breaking of bones, the smear of blood on stone. This is the prehistory of war. Simple, brutal, without negotiation, without treaties, without the illusion of honor. Yet even here, in the fog of prehistory, you see the first signs of strategy, of planning, of preparation. Archaeologists dig into ancient battlefields and find evidence of massacres thousands of years old. Skulls cracked open by clubs, arrows embedded in bones, mass graves where no ceremony accompanied the burial. War, in its most primitive form, was already systematic, already more than an accident. Humanity learned very early that survival was not just about hunting animals, but about defeating rivals. The weapons we made to pierce the hide of a mammoth were soon turned on each other. The ancient instinct was born. And as humanity grew, so too did its conflicts. The first cities rose, and with them the first organized armies. No longer a scramble of hunters with spears, but lines of men drilled to march, shields locked together, spears thrust forward in rhythm. Sumer, Akkad, Egypt, the Indus Valley. Civilization meant surplus, and surplus meant something to steal, something to defend. Walls went up, towers rose, and for every farmer planting grain, there was a soldier standing guard nearby. War had shifted from an accident of survival to a deliberate instrument of power. The ancient instinct adapted itself to each new age. The Egyptians carved their victories into temple walls, chariots racing across the desert, arrows raining from the sky. The Greeks wrote epics of battles, turning bloodshed into legend, telling themselves that glory could make sense of slaughter. The Romans built an empire on military precision, roads designed for legions to march, forts to hold conquered land, laws enforced at the point of a gladius. Everywhere, across centuries and continents, war became ritualized, codified, institutionalized. It was no longer only about food or water or immediate survival. It became about pride, about expansion, about shaping the map itself. Yet the instinct was the same. Nations prepare for war not only because of politics, not only because of resources, but because the memory of vulnerability never fades. Fear is ancient, and it rests in the bones. Each generation tells itself the same story. We will be the last to fight. We will learn from the carnage of our fathers. And then, without fail, they sharpen new swords. They train new armies. They design new strategies, because peace without preparation feels too much like exposure, too much like standing unguarded at the riverbank once more. The story of humanity could be written through its weapons. Stone axes gave way to bronze blades, bronze to iron, iron to steel, bows to crossbows, spears to muskets, muskets to rifles, cannons to artillery, tanks, bombers, nuclear warheads, cyber weapons, satellites armed with unseen power. Each innovation began as an answer to survival, each one quickly adopted as a tool of dominance. The instinct has not changed, only the technology has. You can trace it like a line across time, each advancement tied not only to creativity, but to conflict. Even when empires promise peace, they built it on the foundation of war. The Pax Romana was not the absence of violence, but the product of legions marching across continents, enforcing quiet with discipline and fear. The so-called peace of the 20th century after World War II was not disarmament, but nuclear stalemate. Peace came not because war was abandoned, but because war became too catastrophic to unleash casually. The instinct still whispered, shaping strategies, fueling budgets, building arsenals. Think of the Middle Ages in Europe. Knights in armor, castles on hills, banners fluttering in the wind. On the surface, a time of chivalry, of codes, of noble vows. Yet beneath the poetry of the troubadours lay constant warfare. Lords raiding each other's lands, kingdoms rising and collapsing, peasant soldiers pressed into service to fight battles they barely understood. The instinct endured because no lord, no king, no knight trusted another to keep peace without steel ready at hand. The same is true outside of Europe. The Mongols swept across Asia not because they sought war for its own sake, but because they were honed by a world where strength meant survival, where riding faster and striking harder than your enemies ensured your tribe's future. The instinct to conquer, to expand, to dominate grew from the root of something simpler. Protect your people, secure their future, even if it means destroying someone else's. The samurai of Japan, the warriors of the Zulu kingdom, the armies of the Aztecs, they all embodied the same pattern. The weapons and rituals were different, but the instinct was the same. When you look at modern nations preparing for war today, you are not seeing something new. You are seeing something ancient dressed in modern clothes. The building of aircraft carriers is no different than the building of chariots. The stockpiling of cyber weapons is no different than stockpiling arrows. Satellites in orbit serve the same purpose as scouts on horseback. It is all the same instinct, refined by centuries, polished by technology, but unchanged at its core. Why does this instinct persist? Because memory does not fade. Even in times of peace, nations remember. They remember invasions, betrayals, humiliations, defeats. They remember cities burned, borders crossed, citizens slaughtered. Fear becomes tradition, passed down like an heirloom. One nation arms itself because of history, and its neighbor arms itself in response. Preparation becomes a cycle, each step justified, each side claiming only to defend. Yet when everyone prepares, the ground is primed for conflict. The human story is one of contradiction. We yearn for peace. We build temples to gods of harmony. We write poetry about love and brotherhood. And still, our greatest monuments are often fortresses. Our most lasting inventions are often weapons. Our history books are filled not with years of quiet, but with the dates of wars. This contradiction is the ancient instinct at work, whispering that peace cannot last unless guarded by the threat of violence. And so you live today in a world where every nation sharpens its sword, whether literal or digital, whether visible or hidden. Leaders promise progress, scientists promise cures, but in the background, generals promise readiness. The instinct compels preparation, and preparation shapes reality. From tribal skirmishes to world wars, the pattern is the same. Each generation swears it has learned the lesson. Each generation repeats it. Never again becomes again and again. The ancient instinct does not sleep. It waits in the quiet, in the training fields, in the drills no one reports on, in the stockpiles no one admits exist. It is the hum beneath civilization, the shadow at the edge of progress, the whisper that will not go away. War is as old as humanity itself. And every nation prepares because somewhere deep inside, beneath the speeches and the treaties and the hopeful words, they know what history has already proven. Memory never fades, and fear never rests. You imagine a battlefield, and perhaps you see trenches, tanks, soldiers crawling across ruined earth. But in the modern age, war has many more stages, and most of them look nothing like the mud and blood of old. The battlefield today is not only measured in miles of terrain, but in the movement of currencies, the stability of supply chains, the silent flicker of satellites in orbit, the invisible spread of malware through fiber optic cables. It is a theater of power where soldiers still matter, but they are only one piece in a performance that spans continents. When people say modern war, they rarely mean just the clash of armies. They mean the competition for oil, the manipulation of trade, the race for technological dominance. They mean governments maneuvering economies like chess pieces, each move calculated, each piece sacrificed if necessary. The theater of power is everywhere, and it is staged in 1,000 different arenas all at once. Consider energy, the lifeblood of the modern world. Wars have always been about resources, but oil and gas turned that truth into law. The great powers map pipelines as carefully as they map borders, knowing that whoever controls the flow of fuel controls the rhythm of nations. You may think of a tanker drifting across the ocean as ordinary commerce, but to a strategist, that tanker is as vital as an army division. Shut down one shipping lane, close one strait, and entire economies begin to choke. It is not coincidence that conflicts flare where energy flows. The Middle East, the South China Sea, the Arctic, all regions where oil, gas, and shipping routes converge, all stages where the theater of power is constantly rehearsed. But oil is only one part. Rare earth minerals, lithium for batteries, cobalt for electronics, these are the new front lines. The wars of the future are not only about barrels of crude, but about the metals that power smartphones, electric cars, drones, and missile guidance systems. Nations invest in mines, fund coups, and build alliances not only for ideology, but for the materials hidden under mountains and deserts. Whoever controls the rare elements controls the modern machines of war and peace alike. This theater is not always violent, at least not immediately. Much of it plays out in boardrooms, on trading floors, in quiet negotiations sealed with handshakes and contracts. Yet every deal, every trade pact, every sanction has the weight of a bullet, because in the modern world, economies are weapons. A tariff imposed on one nation can cripple entire industries. A sanction freezing assets can bring leaders to their knees without firing a shot. Banks, once thought of as temples of commerce, now serve as battlegrounds, their ledgers as significant as maps of troop movements. Then there is cyberspace, the invisible battlefield stretching across every home, office, and government building. You cannot see the soldiers here. They do not wear uniforms or march in parades. They sit in darkened rooms in front of glowing screens, launching code instead of missiles, planting viruses instead of mines. Yet the damage they cause can rival any bomb. A hacked power grid leaves millions in the dark. A breached financial system erases billions in seconds. A cyber attack on hospitals, air traffic control, or water treatment plants could collapse the fragile systems that keep modern cities alive. Cyber warfare is not science fiction. It is already here, a constant low-level hum of attacks and defenses. Every major nation fields cyber units, testing defenses, probing weaknesses, sometimes leaving behind hidden traps that can be triggered later. These battles do not make headlines unless they succeed spectacularly, but every day is a rehearsal. Every day is a preparation for when the silent war might become loud. And above all of this lies the sky, once the ultimate high ground, now only one step below the true frontier. Satellites are the eyes and ears of modern war. They guide missiles, direct troops, coordinate communication, monitor borders, and track enemies across oceans. Without satellites, modern militaries would stumble blind, and so space has become another theater of power. Nations launch satellites not just for weather forecasts or television signals, but for surveillance, for navigation, for war. Anti-satellite weapons exist. missiles capable of turning orbital machinery into debris. A single destroyed satellite can litter the sky with fragments that cripple others, a cascading catastrophe known as the Kessler syndrome. The heavens are no longer a sanctuary, they are a potential battlefield. When governments prepare for war today, they do not only build tanks or drill soldiers. They strengthen economies, secure resources, launch satellites, train hackers, and map trade routes. Every budget, every law, every alliance feeds into the theater of power. Soldiers still march in formation, but behind them stand armies of economists, scientists, engineers, bankers, and spies. It is no longer enough to wield a sword. One must wield the world itself. The chessboard is vast. One country cuts off another from a vital market, another responds with sanctions, a third offers loans or military aid, pulling allies closer while isolating rivals. These are moves and countermoves, knights and bishops sliding across the board, each move silent but significant. The people living in these countries often feel it in subtle ways: rising prices, shortages, sudden inflation. They rarely see the strategy, but they live with the consequences. Look at history and you see how often wars begin long before the first shot is fired. Before World War I, it was the arms race between empires, each navy expanding, each factory producing. Before World War II, it was economic desperation, sanctions, and the scramble for resources. During the Cold War, it was proxy wars, nuclear stockpiles, economic embargoes, and space races. Each conflict played out in many theaters long before soldiers met on fields of battle. The same is true today. Wars begin in oil markets, in stock exchanges, in cyber networks, in boardrooms, and in orbit. This is the modern paradox. We live in an age where full-scale world war could end civilization, yet every nation still prepares for it. They prepare not only with armies, but with financial systems designed for resilience, with supply chains designed for flexibility, with satellites designed for survivability, with weapons hidden not in arsenals, but in lines of code. The theater of power is global and constant, and you are already living inside it. Every time a nation stockpiles grain, every time a government drills its citizens on emergency response, every time an intelligence agency discovers malware sleeping in a power grid, the preparation grows louder. You may not hear it, you may not notice it, but it is there, humming beneath the surface. Modern war is no longer just about soldiers and guns. It is about markets, networks, and orbits. It is about economies treated as battlefields, satellites treated as outposts, and information treated as ammunition. You might tell yourself that peace means the theater is empty. But the truth is, the stage is never empty. It is always set, always prepared, the actors rehearsing behind the curtain, the props waiting in the wings. Oil, cyber, space, economy. These are the new battlefields, and they are as real as trenches ever were. The theater of power is not in the future, it is now, and every country plays its part, because in the end, the ancient instinct has only found new stages, new tools, and new scripts. The curtain has not yet risen, but the rehearsal is endless. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon of headlines, the performance waits to begin. You walk across a city and see only glass towers, office blocks, and the slow shuffle of commuters. But beneath the polished streets and quiet suburbs, there are things that are never mentioned in the morning news. Hidden silos in deserts, underground bunkers in mountains, warehouses sealed with armed guards. The world is filled with weapons that governments pretend not to have, or insist they will never use, yet no country dares to be without them. This is the arsenal nobody talks about, the shadow inventory of human civilization, a mixture of silent guardians and ticking catastrophes waiting for the wrong signal, the wrong misunderstanding, the wrong second in history. Nuclear weapons are the most infamous of these. Officially, they exist only to deter, to prevent war by guaranteeing destruction too vast to contemplate. But they are still there, in hardened silos, on submarines gliding under oceans, on bombers that can circle the globe. Thousands of warheads exist, each one capable of flattening cities in a single blast, each one heavier with consequence than any weapon humanity has ever forged. Nations that have them deny any desire to use them. Nations that do not have them often try to develop them in secret, hoping to secure their place at the table of power. To admit you want them is dangerous. To admit you do not need them is naive. And so the arsenal grows, unspoken, unacknowledged, hidden in plain sight. But nuclear fire is only part of the hidden inventory. There are stockpiles of chemical weapons, drums of substances engineered to choke, burn, and blind. They are locked away under treaties that promise destruction, yet history has proven how often treaties are broken. Even when declared obsolete, many of these weapons linger, stored in depots, buried in forgotten bunkers, or hidden in warehouses where few outside the military even know they exist. In theory, they are relics of the past. In reality, their threat has never completely vanished. Governments speak loudly of banning them, but quietly they resist the cost, the logistics, the vulnerability of destroying their stores. The arsenal nobody talks about thrives on silence, and silence has always been its greatest ally. The modern age has created new forms of stockpiles, and they are even harder to track. Digital weapons, lines of code designed not to heal, but to destroy, exist inside servers, hidden like snakes in tall grass. Cyber weapons do not need silos or submarines. They need only a team of programmers and a quiet network connection. These digital arsenals can cripple power grids, corrupt financial systems, disrupt communications, and cause chaos in cities without a single missile leaving its launch pad. The danger lies in their invisibility. Nations can deny them because you cannot photograph a warhead of code, and yet they exist, tested in secret, deployed in whispers, sometimes disguised as accidents when they succeed. This shadow world is not confined to superpowers. Even small states, even groups without borders, have learned to create or acquire weapons that are never openly acknowledged. A chemical lab hidden in a warehouse, a server farm tucked into a city block, a cache of stolen radioactive materials smuggled across a border. The arsenal nobody talks about is not owned only by governments, but by movements, by organizations, by anyone who learns the ancient lesson that power rests in the tools others fear. The paradox is that every nation denies wanting these weapons. Publicly, leaders speak of peace, of arms control, of treaties and disarmament. They shake hands in summits. They pose for cameras. They make declarations about a safer world. But beneath the surface, none of them truly dismantle the foundations of their arsenals. Stockpiles may be moved, modernized, updated, hidden, but rarely destroyed. A country that disarms completely risks being vulnerable. A country that clings to its arsenal risks condemnation. And so the cycle continues, with weapons hidden in deserts, mountains and basements, waiting for a day no one wants to arrive, but no one can rule out. History shows the danger of these shadows. In times of crisis, the weapons that nobody talks about suddenly take center stage. During the Cold War, nuclear arsenals were spoken of only in veiled threats, until a crisis like the Cuban Missile Standoff forced them into the open. During chemical attacks in the 20th century, nations swore such weapons were beyond use, only to see them deployed on battlefields or against civilians. Even in the modern era, cyber weapons once considered speculative have already blacked out cities and sabotaged industrial systems. The arsenal waits in silence, but silence is not the same as safety. The most unsettling part of this hidden inventory is not just the weapons themselves, but the secrecy surrounding them. Citizens rarely know where they are stored or how many exist. Even within governments, knowledge is fragmented, compartmentalized. Generals know some, scientists know others, politicians know only what they are told. This secrecy breeds uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds fear. A neighbor may claim it has destroyed its arsenal, but how can anyone ever be sure? A rival may swear it possesses none, but how can anyone truly trust? In a world where denial is easier than honesty, suspicion becomes the only policy, and suspicion feeds preparation. Nations that suspect their enemies keep hidden arsenals feel compelled to keep their own. Those who fear deception prepare countermeasures. Those who imagine betrayal build redundancy. The very act of silence becomes fuel for further stockpiling. The arsenal nobody talks about grows precisely because no one talks about it. Beneath deserts, warheads sleep in silos. Beneath cities, servers hum with dormant code. Beneath mountains, bunkers house substances so toxic a single leak could poison rivers. Each weapon is labeled as deterrent, as necessary insurance, as a guardian against a worst-case scenario. Yet every one of them is also a catastrophe waiting for a spark, a misunderstanding, a malfunction, a leader pushed too far, a system that fails to recognize the difference between practice and reality. This is the uneasy balance of modern civilization. On the surface, treaties and summits suggest progress, cooperation, control. Beneath the surface, arsenals remain, unspoken but undeniable. Leaders know that to admit weakness is to invite danger. To admit strength is to invite fear. And so they choose the path of silence, the great global game of denial that everyone knows is false but no one dares to break. You live in a world where weapons exist in shadows, where their silence is supposed to preserve peace, but their presence is what makes peace so fragile. Nuclear, chemical, digital, the categories may change, the technologies may evolve, but the principle remains the same. Every nation denies wanting them, but few dare to be without. The arsenal nobody talks about is not a rumor. It is real, and it is waiting. You hear the future long before you see it. The steady hum of drones slicing the sky, the quiet chatter of algorithms mapping patterns across oceans of data, the sonic boom of missiles outrunning the defenses designed in another era. The march of technology has always been relentless, but in war it moves with a peculiar urgency. Every breakthrough in science, no matter how innocent or promising, is shadowed by the same haunting question: how could this be used in war? That question follows us from the invention of fire to the birth of artificial intelligence, from the wheel to the satellite, from the printing press to the internet. It is the drumbeat beneath every innovation, the whisper that keeps pace with progress. Once, war changed slowly. Spears replaced stones, iron replaced bronze, gunpowder replaced arrows, but now the pace is dizzying. A discovery in a university laboratory today may be deployed on a battlefield tomorrow. Civilian technologies bleed into military applications with seamless speed. The smartphone in your pocket contains sensors more advanced than Cold War satellites, processors faster than those that guided men to the moon. The same chip that streams your videos could guide a drone. The same camera that takes your photo could aim a missile. In the march of technology, the line between peaceful invention and instruments of war has grown thin, almost invisible. Drones are the clearest example of this new age. Once dismissed as toys, they now swarm battlefields, eyes in the sky, hands in the fire. Some are small enough to fit in a backpack, buzzing like insects, spying on enemies, delivering explosives with precision. Others are massive, circling above at heights too distant for human eyes to catch, loitering for hours or even days, striking targets thousands of miles away. They change the nature of risk. A soldier can now kill without leaving his chair, guided not by instinct, but by live video feed. The battlefield is no longer only a place of mud and blood. It is a computer screen, a joystick, a satellite uplink. This is not science fiction. It is the daily reality of modern conflict. Artificial intelligence deepens this transformation. Algorithms learn patterns faster than any human general, predicting troop movements, analyzing terrain, identifying weak points in defenses. AI does not tire, does not blink, does not second guess. Already, autonomous systems can select and prioritize targets, making decisions once reserved for human commanders. For now, humans remain in the loop, pressing the final trigger. But the march of technology asks the inevitable. How long before machines decide for themselves? What happens when wars are fought at a speed beyond human comprehension, when the first strike and the counter-strike unfold in milliseconds? AI promises efficiency, but efficiency in war is another word for death delivered faster. Hypersonic missiles embody this race. They travel at speeds that make old defenses obsolete, maneuvering unpredictably, slicing through the atmosphere with a heat and fury that radar struggles to track. A missile launched today could strike across continents in minutes, leaving little time for deliberation, little space for diplomacy. Nations pour billions into these weapons because no one wants to be the country left vulnerable. The march of technology ensures that speed itself becomes a weapon and hesitation becomes fatal. Biotechnology joins the arsenal in quieter ways. Laboratories that develop cures also develop the potential for plagues. Genetic engineering can heal or harm, create resistant crops, or weaponized viruses. The pandemic years reminded the world of how fragile global systems are when faced with disease, and militaries have taken note. It is not only bombs and bullets that shape strategy now, but microbes and mutations, a biological theater of power hidden inside labs and genomes. Even outer space is no longer a sanctuary. Satellites, once symbols of human achievement, are now pawns in military strategy. They guide bombs, track ships, provide communication. Nations test anti-satellite weapons, proving they can blind their rivals with a single strike. Space has become crowded, contested, dangerous. The march of technology stretches into the heavens, where the next war may begin not with boots on the ground, but with sparks in orbit. Cyber warfare is perhaps the most invisible and yet the most constant expression of this technological march. The weapons are not tanks or planes, but lines of code that slip silently through networks. Hackers plant traps inside systems, waiting for the command to unleash chaos. Power grids, banking systems, hospitals, airports, all depend on fragile digital architectures. A keystroke in one country can trigger blackouts in another. Entire nations have been crippled not by bombs, but by malware. Cyber weapons are invisible, deniable, devastating, and they grow more sophisticated with each passing year. Every advance carries with it both promise and peril. The internet connected humanity, but also exposed it to surveillance, manipulation, and propaganda on a global scale. GPS allows you to find your way home, but it also allows missiles to find their way to a target. Artificial intelligence promises medical breakthroughs, but also autonomous weapons that may someday decide who lives and who dies. The same drones that deliver packages can deliver explosives. The same satellites that stream television can direct armies. Technology is never neutral. It is always waiting for someone to ask how it might be turned into an advantage. And war has always been the arena where advantage matters most. This march of technology is not only about tools, it is about speed, about the acceleration of conflict. Wars are no longer fought in seasons, with campaigns that last months. They may unfold in hours, minutes, seconds. A cyber attack can cripple a city in moments. A hypersonic strike can cross oceans before a leader even knows he is under attack. The time for reflection shrinks. The time for decision collapses. In this theater, hesitation can be the difference between survival and annihilation. Nations prepare by building faster systems, faster networks, faster weapons, and as each side accelerates, the pace of war itself becomes unbearable. The danger of this march is not only in its weapons, but in its unpredictability. A drone may malfunction, an algorithm may misinterpret, a missile may mistake a training exercise for an attack. As systems grow more complex, the room for error multiplies, and yet nations cannot resist pushing forward. To stand still is to fall behind. To fall behind is to invite defeat. And so the march continues, relentless, unquestioning, every discovery accompanied by the whisper, "How could this be used in war?" Even the cultural front is shaped by technology. Information itself has become a weapon. Social media spreads propaganda faster than any printing press, turning opinions into battlefields, shaping elections, destabilizing governments without a single bullet fired. The march of technology has made every phone a weapon, every tweet a potential spark, every video a battlefield skirmish in the war for perception. Hearts and minds are now targeted with the same intensity as bunkers and runways. History shows us that every leap forward in science eventually finds its place in war. The chariot, the longbow, the cannon, the machine gun, the tank, the nuclear bomb, each was once revolutionary, each reshaped conflict. Today's revolutions are digital, biological, orbital, and artificial. They promise to reshape war in ways humanity may not yet fully comprehend. The march of technology does not pause for reflection. It does not wait for morality to catch up. It moves forward, step after step, invention after invention, until the weapons of tomorrow are standing beside us today. You live inside this march, often without noticing it. The phone in your pocket, the satellite above your head, the network that delivers your news, all are pieces of the same machine. Nations pour resources into developing faster chips, smarter software, stronger rockets, not only for civilian life, but for the wars they fear may come. Every scientist knows it, every general counts on it, every leader denies it in public, but acknowledges it in private. The march of technology is unstoppable, and its shadow always falls across the battlefield. The most haunting part is not that technology keeps advancing, but that humanity has never managed to separate its greatest ideas from its greatest violence. Every breakthrough that promises to save lives can also be twisted to take them. Every discovery that could unite humanity can also divide it. This is the oldest story told in the newest ways. Fire once cooked meals, but also burned villages. Today, artificial intelligence may cure diseases, but also guide missiles. Tomorrow, something else will rise, and again the question will echo, how could this be used in war? And so the march of technology continues, relentless and indifferent. Drones buzz, AI plots, hypersonic missiles scream through the sky, satellites crowd the heavens, cyber weapons sleep inside the circuits of global networks. Biotechnology hovers on the edge of wonder and terror. Each invention is a step forward, and each step forward carries us closer to a world where war is fought faster, wider, and with consequences we may not be able to contain. The stage is set. The actors are ready. The march will not stop. It never has. You do not have to be old enough to remember the Cold War to feel it pressing against the present. The shadows are everywhere, long and heavy, cast across military budgets, foreign policy speeches, and the satellites that circle the Earth like watchful eyes. The Cold War never truly ended. It simply changed costume. The Berlin Wall may have fallen, the Soviet Union may have collapsed, but the habits, fears, and strategies of that long confrontation still guide the world today. Every nation carries its ghosts, and the Cold War's ghosts are the most disciplined of all. It began in the rubble of World War II, when victory had barely been celebrated before suspicion began. Berlin was divided, Europe split, and suddenly allies in battle became rivals in peace. The lesson was simple and terrifying. Preparation meant survival. Neither side trusted the other, so both poured resources into weapons, armies, and intelligence. The memory of that era, of brinkmanship that nearly ended the world, still beats inside the heart of modern geopolitics. When nations today increase defense spending or expand surveillance networks, they are following the map drawn during those years of icy standoff. Brinkmanship is the word that defined it, the careful dance at the edge of catastrophe. In Berlin, tanks faced off at Checkpoint Charlie, a silent standoff where one wrong twitch could have sparked a Third World War. In Cuba, missiles were planted within striking distance of American cities, and the world held its breath for 13 days, watching two superpowers stare into the abyss. Each moment taught the same lesson. Only the strongest survived the standoff. Only the most prepared could bluff their way back from the brink. That lesson has never been forgotten. Look at military budgets today, and you still see Cold War fingerprints. Trillions are spent not only on conventional armies, but on nuclear arsenals, weapons of mass destruction originally justified as deterrence in a bipolar world. Even though the Soviet Union is gone, nuclear stockpiles remain vast. The logic of mutually assured destruction still shapes decisions in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and beyond. No leader wants to be the one who disarms completely, because every leader remembers what brinkmanship demanded: readiness, even if it meant ruin. The satellites that streak across the sky are also children of the Cold War. Space was never just about exploration. It was a battlefield in orbit, a high ground that both sides rushed to claim. The first satellites were eyes, watching troop movements, monitoring missile silos, mapping enemy terrain from hundreds of miles above. That habit of watching never ended. Today, satellites guide drones, track ships, monitor borders, and gather data that feeds directly into war planning. Every launch is shadowed by that Cold War memory. Whoever controls the sky controls the future. The Cold War also left behind the quiet armies of intelligence agencies. Spies were the foot soldiers of that era, operating in embassies, alleys, and smoke-filled rooms. Today, intelligence still drives national security, only the methods have changed. Cyber espionage replaces microfilm, wiretaps are replaced by data harvesting, and dead drops are replaced by encrypted messages. Yet the culture is the same: suspicion, secrecy, surveillance. Nations trust little, verify everything, and prepare for betrayal. The Cold War taught them that deception was not an exception, but a rule. Even the language of modern diplomacy carries Cold War echoes. Phrases like red lines, containment, and deterrence are not relics, but daily tools. Leaders may speak of cooperation, but they act with the Cold War manual open on the table. Alliances are fortified, spheres of influence defended, proxy wars quietly supported. The shape of conflict is different, but the philosophy is the same. Never give ground, never show weakness, never forget that the other side is waiting for you to blink. This shadow also explains why small conflicts far from the capitals of power often matter so much. In the Cold War, proxy wars burned in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, and countless other places. Each local struggle became global theatre, each civil war a contest of ideology. The same pattern repeats now. Nations involve themselves in conflicts on other continents, not only out of compassion or strategy, but because the Cold War taught them that influence anywhere matters everywhere. A skirmish in a desert can shift balances in boardrooms oceans away. The paranoia of that era remains alive too. Civil defense drills, once common in schools where children hid under desks, may seem quaint now, but the principle survives. Governments still prepare for worst-case scenarios, stockpiling food, medicine, and weapons in secret depots. The fear that tomorrow could bring sudden catastrophe keeps warehouses full and budgets inflated. Even in peace, the shadow whispers that peace is fragile, temporary, and dependent on vigilance. Technology was shaped by that shadow as well. The race for nuclear power, the race for computers, the race for spaceflight, all accelerated because two superpowers could not afford to fall behind. The Internet itself began as a Cold War project, designed to keep communication alive even after nuclear attack. Every time you log on, you are using a tool born of the shadow. The same networks that let you talk to friends were designed with survival in mind, survival against the unthinkable. The Cold War never truly ended because its inventions never left us. And yet, for all the danger, the Cold War also carved out a paradoxical peace. It was a peace built on fear, on arsenals too powerful to use, on the certainty that any attack would bring annihilation in return. It was a peace unlike any before, a silence enforced not by trust, but by terror. That logic persists today. Nations do not simply build weapons for victory, they build them to prevent anyone else from striking first. The shadow is not just about memory, it is about method. Modern leaders study those years not as ancient history, but as instruction. They look at how crises were managed, how signals were sent, how escalation was slowed just enough to avoid disaster. The Cold War was a classroom in survival, and its lessons are etched into every war game, every strategy, every exercise conducted today. From the South China Sea to Eastern Europe, nations act with those ghosts whispering in their ears. Be ready, be cautious, be ruthless, but above all, never be unprepared. The shadow stretches into culture as well. Movies, books, and television still recycle the imagery of spies, nuclear countdowns, and divided cities. Generations that never lived through it still dream about mushroom clouds and shadowy agents because the narrative has never been buried. It seeps into imagination, shaping the way people think about war and peace. The Cold War may have ended in fact, but in story it has become timeless, a mythology of survival in the face of endless threat. Walk through Berlin today, and you see glass towers rising where the wall once stood. Yet memorials mark the division, museums tell the story, and the air itself feels heavy with memory. In Cuba, the echoes of those tense days still hang over relations with the United States. In Russia, the collapse of the Soviet Union remains a wound, a humiliation some leaders vow to reverse. In America, the triumph of outlasting a rival fuels a belief in military supremacy. No one has escaped the shadow, everyone lives in it. And so, military budgets swell, satellites multiply, and alliances harden. The Cold War may be spoken of in the past tense, but its ghost stands at every table where decisions are made. It watches every launch, listens to every negotiation, whispers into every briefing. The world remembers, and the memory is not gentle. The shadow teaches that peace without preparation is fantasy, that trust without power is suicide. The Cold War may be history, but its shadow is the present. From Berlin to Cuba, from Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to every capital caught in between, the shadow lingers. The arsenals built then remain today. The surveillance pioneered then still grows. The paranoia perfected then still rules. The world remembers, and the shadow ensures it never forgets. You live in a world that pretends peace is guaranteed by signatures and handshakes, by banners waving over conference halls and polished speeches that declare unity. But behind those smiles and flags lies a truth far more fragile. Alliances are webs, delicate and stretched thin, holding together the ambitions of nations that often trust one another only as long as it suits them. Allies promise protection, enemies promise destruction, and both keep leaders awake at night, calculating what those promises are truly worth. Treaties are ink on paper, but ink fades, and paper tears easily. History has shown again and again that one broken alliance can redraw the map of the world. The promise of an ally is a powerful thing. It reassures citizens that in a time of crisis they will not stand alone, that armies will march and fleets will sail in their defense. It sends signals to rivals that aggression will be met with unified strength. Yet that promise is also a gamble. Alliances are not forged in friendship, but in interest. Nations do not bind themselves together out of love, but out of necessity. And necessity shifts with time. What was once an iron bond can quickly rust when trade routes change, when leadership changes, when resources dry up, or when enemies find ways to divide supposed friends. Think of the alliances that failed in the past. Before World War I, a network of treaties and promises tied Europe together like knots. Leaders believed those knots would hold peace in place, that no country would dare risk sparking a chain reaction of obligations. But when a single assassination in Sarajevo lit the fuse, those treaties did not prevent war. They dragged the entire continent into it. An alliance meant to deter conflict became the mechanism that guaranteed its spread. This is the danger of fragile webs. They do not always prevent storms. Sometimes they catch fire and carry it farther than anyone intended. World War II told a different story, but carried the same warning. Nations trusted alliances that did not hold, relied on promises that were abandoned when tested. Betrayal and appeasement reshaped the world as much as courage and resistance. The lesson burned into history is that alliances are never stronger than the will of the nations behind them. If leaders falter, if citizens lose appetite for sacrifice, an ally can vanish overnight, leaving former partners exposed and vulnerable. The Cold War wove its own webs, NATO on one side, the Warsaw Pact on the other. These blocs divided the globe into armed camps, each promising collective defense. NATO declared that an attack on one was an attack on all, a phrase that still echoes today in military doctrine. Yet even within those blocs, suspicion lingered. Nations debated how far they were willing to go, how much blood they would shed for their partners. Would America risk nuclear war for Berlin? Would European states sacrifice their cities for distant battlefields? The promises were there, but the doubts never disappeared. In today's world, those doubts are louder than ever. Alliances stretch across oceans, binding countries with different cultures, different economies, and different priorities. Leaders stand together for photographs, but behind the cameras they argue over trade, over funding, over who carries more of the burden. Citizens in allied countries sometimes question why their taxes and their soldiers should defend places they cannot find on a map. Politicians rise who call old alliances into question, demanding renegotiation, sometimes even threatening withdrawal. The web still holds, but it trembles with every shift in public opinion, every election, every crisis. And then there are the enemies. For every alliance, there is a rival determined to test it. Enemies promise destruction, and they study alliances not only to measure strength, but to search for weakness. They prod at borders, launch cyber attacks, stir up disinformation campaigns, all designed to ask the same question: will allies truly defend each other when it matters? The answer is never certain, and that uncertainty is itself a weapon. If enemies can convince one ally to hesitate, to question, to hold back, the entire web may unravel. The fragility of alliances is not only about betrayal, but about overstretch. No nation can be everywhere, defend everything, or answer every call. When crises multiply, alliances are tested by exhaustion. One partner may be dealing with internal unrest, another with economic collapse, another with natural disaster. The promise to defend one another is absolute in words, but conditional in reality. Allies can fail not only because they choose to, but because they cannot act quickly enough, decisively enough, or at all. A fragile web breaks not always from deliberate betrayal, but from strain too great to bear. Technology complicates this web even further. Cyber warfare blurs the lines of attack and defense. If one nation in an alliance suffers a blackout from a cyber strike, is that an act of war? Do allies respond with soldiers, with sanctions, with missiles? Or do they hesitate, unsure who is to blame, unsure whether retaliation might spiral beyond control? Satellites are blinded, trade routes disrupted, information weaponized. Each new form of warfare creates new questions alliances are not prepared to answer. Enemies exploit that hesitation, widening cracks in the web until the strands snap. The most haunting reality is how quickly a single broken alliance can redraw the world. Borders shift, regimes collapse, wars ignite when one nation decides the risks of abandoning a partner are lower than the risks of keeping its promise. History's maps are covered in scars where alliances failed. Empires fell when partners turned into rivals. Nations were divided, conquered, erased because a promise was not kept. Every leader today knows this, and it is why alliances are spoken of so loudly in public, even as they are questioned in private. The louder the reassurance, the more fragile the bond may truly be. And yet, for all their fragility, alliances endure because nations cannot face the world alone. Power is rarely solitary. Even the strongest countries seek allies to extend their influence, to share burdens, to deter aggression. It is better to stand in a web, however fragile, than to stand completely alone. Leaders know this, generals know this, citizens know this. The alliances may fray, but they are rewoven again and again, because the alternative, absolute isolation, feels even more dangerous. That is the paradox of the fragile web. It is both essential and unreliable, both shield and trap. It keeps nations awake at night, wondering whether their allies will hold the line or walk away. It forces enemies to hesitate, but also tempts them to probe. It promises safety, but it cannot guarantee it. And so nations prepare, strengthening the web with treaties, exercises, shared intelligence, joint commands, while simultaneously preparing for the day it may snap. The world remembers every betrayal, every broken promise, every collapse of unity. Those memories fuel military budgets, satellite surveillance, war games, and endless negotiations. Allies promise protection, enemies promise destruction, and between those two promises lies the fragile peace of our time. One broken strand may one day unravel it all, and when it does, the map of the world will not be the same. You live in a world that pretends peace is guaranteed by signatures and handshakes, by banners waving over conference halls and polished speeches that declare unity. But behind those smiles and flags lies a truth far more fragile. Alliances are webs, delicate and stretched thin, holding together the ambitions of nations that often trust one another only as long as it suits them. Allies promise protection, enemies promise destruction, and both keep leaders awake at night, calculating what those promises are truly worth. Treaties are ink on paper, but ink fades and paper tears easily. History has shown again and again that one broken alliance can redraw the map of the world. The promise of an ally is a powerful thing. It reassures citizens that in a time of crisis they will not stand alone, that armies will march and fleets will sail in their defense. It sends signals to rivals that aggression will be met with unified strength. Yet that promise is also a gamble. Alliances are not forged in friendship, but in interest. Nations do not bind themselves together out of love, but out of necessity, and necessity shifts with time. What was once an iron bond can quickly rust when trade routes change, when leadership changes, when resources dry up, or when enemies find ways to divide supposed friends. Think of the alliances that failed in the past. Before World War I, a network of treaties and promises tied Europe together like knots. Leaders believed those knots would hold peace in place, that no country would dare risk sparking a chain reaction of obligations. But when a single assassination in Sarajevo lit the fuse, those treaties did not prevent war. They dragged the entire continent into it. An alliance meant to deter conflict became the mechanism that guaranteed its spread. This is the danger of fragile webs. They do not always prevent storms. Sometimes they catch fire and carry it farther than anyone intended. World War II told a different story, but carried the same warning. Nations trusted alliances that did not hold, relied on promises that were abandoned when tested. Betrayal and appeasement reshaped the world as much as courage and resistance. The lesson burned into history is that alliances are never stronger than the will of the nations behind them. If leaders falter, if citizens lose appetite for sacrifice, an ally can vanish overnight, leaving former partners exposed and vulnerable. The Cold War wove its own webs, NATO on one side, the Warsaw Pact on the other. These blocs divided the globe into armed camps, each promising collective defense. NATO declared that an attack on one was an attack on all, a phrase that still echoes today in military doctrine. Yet even within those blocs, suspicion lingered. Nations debated how far they were willing to go, how much blood they would shed for their partners. Would America risk nuclear war for Berlin? Would European states sacrifice their cities for distant battlefields? The promises were there, but the doubts never disappeared. In today's world, those doubts are louder than ever. Alliances stretch across oceans, binding countries with different cultures, different economies, and different priorities. Leaders stand together for photographs, but behind the cameras they argue over trade, over funding, over who carries more of the burden. Citizens in allied countries sometimes question why their taxes and their soldiers should defend places they cannot find on a map. Politicians rise who call old alliances into question, demanding renegotiation, sometimes even threatening withdrawal. The web still holds, but it trembles with every shift in public opinion, every election, every crisis. And then there are the enemies. For every alliance, there is a rival determined to test it. Enemies promise destruction, and they study alliances not only to measure strength, but to search for weakness. They prod at borders, launch cyber attacks, stir up disinformation campaigns, all designed to ask the same question: Will allies truly defend each other when it matters? The answer is never certain, and that uncertainty is itself a weapon. If enemies can convince one ally to hesitate, to question, to hold back, the entire web may unravel. The fragility of alliances is not only about betrayal, but about overstretch. No nation can be everywhere, defend everything, or answer every call. When crises multiply, alliances are tested by exhaustion. One partner may be dealing with internal unrest, another with economic collapse, another with natural disaster. The promise to defend one another is absolute in words, but conditional in reality. Allies can fail not only because they choose to, but because they cannot act quickly enough, decisively enough, or at all. A fragile web breaks not always from deliberate betrayal, but from strain too great to bear. Technology complicates this web even further. Cyber warfare blurs the lines of attack and defense. If one nation in an alliance suffers a blackout from a cyber strike, is that an act of war? Do allies respond with soldiers, with sanctions, with missiles? Or do they hesitate, unsure who is to blame, unsure whether retaliation might spiral beyond control? Satellites are blinded, trade routes disrupted, information weaponized. Each new form of warfare creates new questions alliances are not prepared to answer. Enemies exploit that hesitation, widening cracks in the web until the strands snap. The most haunting reality is how quickly a single broken alliance can redraw the world. Borders shift, regimes collapse, wars ignite when one nation decides the risks of abandoning a partner are lower than the risks of keeping its promise. History's maps are covered in scars where alliances failed. Empires fell when partners turned into rivals. Nations were divided, conquered, erased because a promise was not kept. Every leader today knows this, and it is why alliances are spoken of so loudly in public, even as they are questioned in private. The louder the reassurance, the more fragile the bond may truly be. And yet, for all their fragility, alliances endure because nations cannot face the world alone. Power is rarely solitary. Even the strongest countries seek allies to extend their influence, to share burdens, to deter aggression. It is better to stand in a web, however fragile, than to stand completely alone. Leaders know this. Generals know this. Citizens know this. The alliances may fray, but they are rewoven again and again because the alternative, absolute isolation, feels even more dangerous. That is the paradox of the fragile web. It is both essential and unreliable, both shield and trap. It keeps nations awake at night, wondering whether their allies will hold the line or walk away. It forces enemies to hesitate, but also tempts them to probe. It promises safety, but it cannot guarantee it. And so nations prepare, strengthening the web with treaties, exercises, shared intelligence, joint commands, while simultaneously preparing for the day it may snap. The world remembers every betrayal, every broken promise, every collapse of unity. Those memories fuel military budgets, satellite surveillance, war games, and endless negotiations. Allies promise protection, enemies promise destruction, and between those two promises lies the fragile peace of our time. One broken strand may one day unravel it all, and when it does, the map of the world will not be the same. You look at the maps of history and see borders shifting, flags rising and falling, empires built and destroyed. Leaders talk of honor, of ideology, of faith and freedom. But when you strip away the speeches, the banners, the patriotic songs, something far more basic often lies beneath. Wars are not fought only for glory or belief. They are fought for the lifeblood of survival, resources, oil, water, fertile soil, rare earth minerals. These are the prizes that armies march for, the treasures hidden beneath the justifications written afterward. The war of resources has shaped every age, from the first river valleys claimed by ancient kings to the modern pipelines stretching across deserts and seas. Think of oil, the black liquid that turned the 20th century into an engine of fire and steel. Entire wars have been launched to secure it. Armies have crossed deserts not for ideology, but for the wells that fuel tanks and aircraft. Nations that control oil wield power far beyond their borders, because oil powers not only armies, but economies. Without it, planes stay grounded, ships remain in harbour, factories grow silent. Every modern conflict carries the shadow of oil behind it. From the Middle East to the Arctic, the race to control reserves and routes is a constant drumbeat. Leaders may speak of democracy, stability, or security, but beneath the speeches lies the hunger for energy. Whoever controls the pipeline controls the future. Water, though less visible, may be an even greater source of conflict. Civilization itself was born on riverbanks, and from the beginning, people have fought over access to rivers, lakes, and wells. Today, as populations grow and climates shift, water has become as valuable as oil, sometimes more so. Nations that share rivers argue over dams and irrigation, accusing each other of theft, threatening retaliation if the flow is altered. Farmers and soldiers alike depend on the same streams, and when drought strikes, tensions rise. In arid regions, every drop carries the weight of survival, and disputes over water have sparked skirmishes that could easily become wars. Imagine cities going thirsty, crops withering, power plants shutting down, all because one neighbor upstream decides to turn a valve. In such moments, bullets become as inevitable as raindrops once were. The hunger for fertile soil has also driven wars for centuries. Land is life. It grows food, supports populations, and sustains armies. Empires expanded into new territories, not only to raise flags, but to secure farmland, to feed growing cities, to prevent famine. Colonization was justified with words about civilization and progress, but beneath those words was always the quest for fertile ground, for plantations, for resources that could be shipped back to distant capitals. Even now, in a world of global trade, nations still worry about food security. Fields are still battlegrounds, not only for farmers, but for armies that march across them. Invasions often target breadbasket regions, the heartlands that keep nations fed. The war of resources reminds us that ideology may ignite conflict, but hunger sustains it. Rare earth minerals are the newest front line in this ancient struggle. These elements, hidden in mountains and deserts, power the devices of the modern age. Smartphones, electric cars, satellites, drones, and missile systems. They are the invisible foundation of modern life, and whoever controls them holds leverage over entire industries. Mining rights are contested, supply chains are weaponized, and competition grows fierce as nations scramble to secure the materials that will shape the wars of tomorrow. Conflicts in Africa, Asia, and South America often trace back not to ideology, but to the mines that lie beneath the soil, mines rich with cobalt, lithium, and other rare elements. The war of resources evolves with technology, but the pattern remains the same. Armies mobilize not for speeches, but for supply lines. Ports, railways, highways, and shipping lanes are as critical as battlefields. Wars are waged to secure access to harbors that can move oil, to protect straits through which tankers sail, to dominate canals that shorten trade routes by thousands of miles. Control of a port can mean control of an economy. Control of a canal can mean control of global trade. In every era, generals know that logistics win wars, and logistics depend on resources. Soldiers fight not just for land, but for the infrastructure that carries resources to where they are needed most. History offers countless reminders. The scramble for colonies in the 19th century was not only about national pride, it was about rubber, sugar, cotton, and gold. The Pacific campaigns of World War II were not only about territory, they were about oil fields, rice harvests, and shipping routes. The conflicts in the Middle East across the last century were not only about politics or religion, they were about who controls the wells, the refineries, and the pipelines. Every generation invents new banners, but the war of resources remains unchanged. The irony is that while leaders deny fighting for resources, soldiers and citizens feel the truth in their bones. They see the convoys guarding oil fields, the dams ringed with troops, the mines patrolled by armed guards. They hear rumors of contracts signed in secret, of companies funding armies to secure profits. The language of war may speak of freedom and defense, but the reality is that resources determine survival. Without energy, water, food, and minerals, no ideology, no government, no empire can endure. The future promises even more strain. Climate change reshapes the map of scarcity. Droughts grow longer, storms destroy crops, rising seas threaten coastlines. As resources grow harder to secure, nations grow more desperate to protect what they have and to seize what they need. Wars that once seemed distant may ignite quickly as populations struggle with shortages. Already, migration caused by resource scarcity fuels political instability as millions leave arid lands or flooded coasts in search of livable ground. Each wave of migration sparks new tensions, new rivalries, new fears. The war of resources is no longer just about armies, it is about survival at the most basic level. Technology intensifies these struggles. Desalination plants promise water, but they require energy. Renewable energy promises independence, but it demands minerals for turbines, batteries, and panels. Every solution creates new dependencies, new bottlenecks, new reasons for conflict. Nations that lead in green technology guard their patents and supply chains as fiercely as others guard oil wells. The transition to a different kind of energy economy does not end the war of resources, it reshapes it. Instead of fighting over wells, nations may fight over mines. Instead of tankers, they may fight over supply chains for batteries. The weapons change, but the hunger remains. You can already hear the echoes in modern headlines. Disputes over islands are not only about sovereignty, but about oil and gas beneath the seabed. Tensions along rivers are not only about territory, but about water for millions. Border clashes in remote deserts are not about ideology, but about minerals that power global industries. Leaders may never admit it publicly, but their generals know, their ministers know, and their citizens often suspect. Behind almost every conflict lies the war of resources. And the cost of this war is not only measured in territory gained or lost, it is measured in villages burned for farmland, in rivers poisoned by mining, in forests stripped for plantations, in cities starved by blockades. The war of resources devastates not only people, but the environment itself, leaving scars that last generations. Armies march away, treaties are signed, maps are redrawn, but the soil remains ruined, the wells remain dry, the forests remain gone. The hunger for resources feeds not only wars, but long-term destruction. Yet, nations cannot walk away from it. To abandon the war of resources would mean abandoning survival itself. Leaders know that citizens demand not only safety, but food, fuel, and water. Armies know that without supplies, they cannot fight. Economies know that without materials, they cannot grow. So the struggle continues, disguised by rhetoric, fueled by necessity, stretching across continents and centuries. Oil, water, fertile soil, rare earth minerals. These are the silent generals of war, commanding armies more effectively than any human ever could. The war of resources is older than ideology, and newer than the latest mine. It drives decisions in boardrooms, battlefields, and ballot boxes. It ties the fate of distant nations together, binding farmers in one country to soldiers in another, binding consumers in cities to miners in deserts. It is the thread beneath the banners, the engine beneath the speeches, the truth beneath the myths. And until humanity learns how to live without hunger, without scarcity, without dependence on what lies in the earth, the war of resources will march on, as it always has, as it always will. You think of war and imagine explosions, soldiers charging across battlefields, or missiles streaking through the sky. But the wars of today and tomorrow may not start with sound at all. They may begin with silence, a silence heavy enough to paralyze a city. Lights flicker and then go dark. The hum of refrigerators stops. Traffic lights freeze on red. Phones lose their signal. Banks close without warning. Airports announce delays as planes are grounded, not because of bombs or hijackers, but because the invisible systems that guide them have been corrupted. This is the silent battlefield of cyberspace, a domain where battles unfold without smoke or fire, where victories and defeats are measured in lines of code instead of miles of land. Every nation now builds cyber armies, teams of specialists armed not with rifles, but with laptops, servers, and vast networks of compromised machines. They are the new soldiers of the digital age, trained to infiltrate, disrupt, and defend the systems that hold modern civilization together. In a world where power grids, hospitals, financial markets, and even military command centers are connected to the internet, cyberspace has become a front line as important as land, sea, air, or orbit. The generals of this frontier speak of malware and zero-day exploits the way older generations spoke of tanks and artillery. And the terrifying truth is that silence in this battlefield may kill faster than bombs. Consider what happens when a power grid collapses. A city of millions plunges into darkness. Hospitals switch to backup generators, but fuel only lasts so long. Traffic snarls as streetlights fail. Police and emergency services struggle to respond without communications. Citizens panic. Looting breaks out, and the social order begins to unravel. Such devastation could once be caused only by massive bombing campaigns, but now it could be triggered by a carefully coded cyber weapon slipping unnoticed into a control system. The blackout is not only a metaphor, it is a weapon. Banks are no less vulnerable. Modern economies are numbers and signals, balances stored in databases, transactions processed by algorithms. A cyber attack can freeze accounts, erase records, or flood systems with false data until trust itself collapses. When citizens cannot access their savings, when businesses cannot transfer funds, when investors lose confidence in what numbers mean, chaos spreads faster than any fire. Stock markets crash. Panic grows. A financial system paralyzed by cyber warfare does not need bombs to destroy. It collapses under the weight of uncertainty. Airports and airlines, too, are ripe targets. Planes rely on complex digital systems to navigate, schedule, and communicate. A cyber strike that grounds flights, disrupts air traffic control, or compromises navigation could paralyze global travel within hours. Not a single shot fired, yet millions stranded, economies shaken, supply chains frozen. The silent battlefield turns the conveniences of modern life into vulnerabilities, each one a potential weapon waiting to be turned against the people who depend on it. This is why nations invest billions into cyber capabilities. The cyber battlefield does not require massive armies or fleets. It requires brains, resources, and relentless preparation. A group of skilled programmers can cause more damage in days than a division of tanks could in months. For smaller nations, cyber warfare offers a way to stand toe-to-toe with superpowers. For superpowers, it is an essential layer of defense and offense, an invisible shield and an invisible spear. Everyone participates because no one dares to be defenseless in a world where silence can be lethal. The tools of this battlefield are as varied as any arsenal. Malware infiltrates systems silently, waiting for commands to strike. Worms spread automatically, infecting thousands of machines in hours. Ransomware locks down hospitals or corporations, demanding payment for release. Denial of service attacks flood servers until they collapse under the weight of false traffic. Spyware hides quietly, gathering information, sending secrets back to foreign hands. Some weapons are designed for disruption, others for destruction, but all of them exploit the same truth. Humans have built their entire civilization on fragile digital foundations. The most famous example is Stuxnet, the cyber weapon discovered more than a decade ago. It infiltrated Iran's nuclear facilities, quietly sabotaging centrifuges while reporting normal data back to operators. For months, no one realized machines were failing not by accident, but by design. It was proof that cyber warfare could cripple critical infrastructure as effectively as bombs. Since then, attacks have multiplied. Power plants have gone dark. Cities have experienced mysterious blackouts. Corporations have lost billions, and governments have discovered malware embedded in their most sensitive systems. Each event is a reminder that the silent battlefield is not theoretical. It is active, constant, and evolving. The frightening part is attribution. When a missile lands, you can often trace its origin. When a cyber weapon strikes, blame is murky. Hackers disguise their identities, reroute attacks through neutral countries, plant false flags to mislead investigators. Nations can deny involvement, even when suspicion is overwhelming. This ambiguity makes response dangerous. Retaliate against the wrong actor, and you risk escalating a conflict based on shadows. Fail to respond at all, and you invite further attacks. The silent battlefield thrives on this uncertainty, where silence and denial are as powerful as any weapon. Citizens rarely see these battles, yet they live with their consequences. A hospital system goes offline during surgery. A train line halts without explanation. Social media floods with propaganda designed to divide and destabilize. These are not accidents. They are campaigns, carefully crafted to weaken societies, to make people question their governments, to make allies distrust one another. Cyber warfare does not only target machines, it targets minds. Disinformation campaigns spread faster than any virus, sowing division, fueling unrest, turning citizens against each other until a nation weakens from within. In this way, silence in the network echoes in the streets. Every major military knows this, which is why they build cyber commands alongside traditional branches. Soldiers still train with rifles, but they also train with keyboards. Generals still study tank battles, but they also study network architectures. Wars are planned not only with maps of terrain, but with diagrams of power grids and communication hubs. Exercises simulate not only troop movements, but nationwide blackouts. Leaders ask not only how many missiles they can launch, but how many systems they can disable before the missiles even need to fly. The race in cyberspace mirrors the arms races of the past. Nations constantly probe each other's defenses, test each other's responses, and stockpile digital weapons ready to be unleashed. Just as nuclear weapons were kept as deterrents, cyber weapons are developed and stored in silence, waiting for the moment they are deemed necessary. The difference is that cyber weapons can often be used without triggering open war. They can harass, test, and weaken rivals continuously, always short of outright declaration, always hidden beneath the veil of deniability. The battlefield never sleeps, because the internet never sleeps. The cost of defending against this threat is enormous. Governments invest in firewalls, encryption, redundancy, and training, yet no system is invulnerable. Hackers need only one overlooked weakness, one forgotten update, one human error to slip inside. Defenders must be perfect every day. Attackers need only succeed once. This imbalance guarantees that the silent battlefield will remain active, a permanent feature of modern life. The best defenses slow attacks, but they rarely stop them completely. And while governments race to protect infrastructure, individuals are also caught in the crossfire. Personal data is stolen, identities hacked, bank accounts drained, private conversations exposed. For ordinary people, the silent battlefield is not an abstract concept. It is the daily reality of phishing emails, ransomware demands, and compromised devices. What begins as a national struggle often bleeds into personal life, leaving citizens as unwilling combatants in a war they never enlisted for. The future of this battlefield is even more daunting. As artificial intelligence grows more sophisticated, it will be harnessed to create smarter attacks, more convincing disinformation, and more adaptive defenses. Quantum computing threatens to shatter current encryption methods, potentially leaving entire systems exposed. The Internet of Things connects everything from cars to refrigerators, creating millions of new entry points for attacks. Autonomous weapons, guided by digital brains, could one day be hacked and turned against their owners. The march of technology ensures that cyberspace will only grow more contested, more dangerous, more essential. The silence before such an attack may feel calm, but it is deceptive. War in cyberspace does not need a dramatic beginning. It can creep slowly, undermining confidence, eroding trust, weakening infrastructure bit by bit. By the time citizens realize they are under siege, the damage may already be irreversible. And unlike traditional wars, cyber wars may not end with treaties. They may smolder indefinitely, a constant state of low-level conflict woven into the background of daily life. This is why every nation builds cyber armies. To remain defenseless would be suicide in an era where silence is deadly. The generals of today know that the first strike of the next major war may not be a missile, but a blackout. The first casualty may not be a soldier, but a server. The first battle may not be fought in trenches, but in code. And when it happens, the world may wake up in the dark, with planes grounded, banks paralyzed, hospitals overwhelmed, and streets filled with confusion. The silent battlefield of cyberspace is here. It is constant, it is invisible, and it is lethal. Wars once began with gunfire and banners. Today, they begin with silence. The silence of lights going out, the silence of screens freezing, the silence of a civilization that has built its foundations on fragile networks. Every nation prepares, because in the digital age, silence may kill faster than bombs. You hear the news, and it speaks of regional conflicts, civil wars, and internal disputes, as if violence in far-off deserts, jungles, and cities is self-contained. But behind the headlines lurks a truth that governments rarely admit out loud. These battles are not isolated. They are connected, fed, and fueled by powers who never appear on the front lines. Proxy wars have become the hidden skeleton of modern conflict, where nations fund, arm, and advise from the shadows. They are rehearsals for something larger, practice rounds carried out on smaller stages, deniable wars that everyone understands are real but few will confess to. The pattern is ancient, but it has grown sharper in the modern era. A local militia suddenly receives new weapons far more advanced than anything they could have bought themselves. A rebel force gains access to intelligence only a state could provide. A civil war drags on for years, not because one side cannot win, but because outside powers keep both sides supplied just enough to prevent a final victory. These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of proxy conflict. Nations test strategies, bleed rivals, and stake influence, all while pretending they are uninvolved. During the Cold War, proxy wars became the standard method of avoiding direct confrontation between superpowers. In Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Africa, local battlefields became global chessboards. American rifles and Soviet tanks clashed not under their flags, but in the hands of allies and clients. Citizens were told these were struggles of ideology, capitalism versus communism, freedom versus tyranny. But beneath those slogans lay the real game. Each side was testing weapons, gauging strategies, exhausting the other without risking nuclear annihilation. The superpowers could not fight each other openly, so they fought through others, spilling blood far from their own cities. That method never ended. Today, proxy wars simmer in the Middle East, in parts of Africa, in the contested regions of Asia and South America. Militias are trained in secret camps, armed with weapons stamped by foreign factories, financed through labyrinthine networks of shell companies and covert funds. Nations that deny involvement in public speeches quietly monitor progress in war rooms, counting gains and losses as if they were their own. Leaders assure their citizens they are committed to peace, while intelligence services funnel crates of rifles, drones, and ammunition into airports at night. For the people caught in the middle, there is no difference between a war fought for ideology and a war fought as a proxy. The bullets tear the same flesh, the bombs collapse the same homes, the hunger spreads just as quickly. Civilians rarely know who is paying for the weapons that destroy their neighborhoods. They may hear rumors, but the true sponsors stay hidden behind layers of secrecy and denial. This is why it is the war nobody admits to, because admitting it would expose the machinery of manipulation, the quiet calculations that value influence over human lives. Proxy wars also serve as laboratories. Nations test not only weapons, but tactics and technologies. Drones are deployed in real battles before their blueprints are even declassified. Cyber attacks are disguised as the work of local rebels, when in reality they are orchestrated by sophisticated foreign teams. Even propaganda strategies, social media campaigns, disinformation flooding, manufactured outrage are practiced in these smaller wars. Each conflict becomes a classroom, each battlefield a proving ground. Successes are noted, failures adjusted, all in preparation for the possibility of larger wars to come. The most chilling aspect is how normalized this practice has become. Governments rarely call them proxy wars. Instead, they use softer terms, supporting partners, stabilizing regions, training missions. But behind those words is the same reality. One country using another's soil as its battlefield, one population paying the price for someone else's ambitions. Nations find it safer to fight this way, to risk the lives of others rather than their own soldiers, to spend treasure on weapons rather than blood on coffins returning home. And yet, while safer for the sponsors, proxy wars are often deadlier for the locals, because the fighting never ends until the outside powers lose interest. Proxy wars are also tools of exhaustion. By fueling conflict in a rival's sphere of influence, a nation can drain its opponent economically and politically. Armies stretched thin, budgets strained, governments destabilized. This is the quiet math behind proxy conflict. Each crate of ammunition delivered is not only meant to aid an ally, but to sap the strength of an enemy. Each drone strike carried out by a local militia is a message sent indirectly, a way of saying, we can bleed you without ever firing directly at your flag. The public face of diplomacy almost never acknowledges this. Leaders shake hands at summits, sign agreements, and declare peace, all while their intelligence agencies are slipping funds into the accounts of armed groups across the world. The hypocrisy is as old as politics itself. Citizens are told their countries stand for peace and stability, but the truth is written in the burned villages and displaced populations of faraway lands. The war nobody admits to is kept quiet precisely because to admit it would unravel the illusion of moral clarity nations present to their people. This silence does not erase the evidence. Weapons are traced back to their factories. Training manuals captured on the battlefield reveal foreign origins. Soldiers are overheard speaking languages from across the globe. Entire units vanish across borders, only to reappear under different banners. Journalists dig, investigators uncover, and yet denials remain constant. Nations are masters of saying one thing while doing another, and proxy wars thrive in that gap between words and actions. The cost is staggering. Millions displaced, economies shattered, cultures fractured. Proxy wars rarely end cleanly. Without decisive victory, conflicts stretch on for decades, leaving generations who know nothing but fighting. When outside powers finally pull their support, the ruins remain, and the locals are left to rebuild on ashes. It is why these wars are sometimes called forever wars, because their length is determined not by local conditions, but by the interests of distant capitals. And still, nations continue to fight them, because for all their horror, proxy wars offer advantages. They provide plausible deniability. They allow great powers to test each other without risking total war. They extend influence into regions that might otherwise remain neutral. They serve as pressure valves, places where tension is released in battles fought by others. For leaders seeking power without direct risk, proxy wars are irresistible tools. Modern technology only deepens this trend. Drones allow nations to project power into conflicts without ever deploying ground troops. Cyber attacks let them disrupt adversaries under the guise of rebel action. Satellite surveillance provides real-time intelligence to allied militias, leveling the battlefield against larger conventional forces. The tools of the digital age make proxy warfare even easier to wage and harder to detect. When every phone can be tracked, every post manipulated, every drone flown by remote operators thousands of miles away, the distinction between local and foreign involvement blurs completely. This is why proxy wars are the war nobody admits to, but everyone recognizes. From deserts to jungles, from mountains to city streets, they burn quietly, each one a piece of a larger puzzle. To study them is to see the outlines of the next global conflict, because they reveal what nations are willing to risk, what technologies they are developing, what strategies they favor. They are not distractions from larger wars, they are previews. And so they simmer in refugee camps filled with those displaced by battles they never chose, in marketplaces rebuilt again and again after bombings, in schools where children learn under the shadow of drones they cannot name, in capitals where politicians vote on budgets that send weapons overseas while denying any responsibility for what follows. The war nobody admits to surrounds you, even if it is kept in whispers and footnotes. History will one day describe these wars as clearly as it now describes the proxy battles of the Cold War. But in the present, they remain cloaked. Nations prepare for the future by bleeding others in the present. They test, they learn, they maneuver, always pretending their hands are clean. And while leaders deny it, the people who live through it know the truth. Proxy wars are not accidents. They are deliberate, designed, calculated. They are the hidden architecture of modern conflict, and they are the clearest reminder that in the pursuit of power, silence is often the loudest sound of all. You live in a world that is quieter than it should be, a world where missiles wait in silos, submarines glide beneath oceans, carrying payloads that could incinerate continents, and planes circle the skies with weapons no one dares to fire. The silence is not peace in the truest sense. It is something stranger, something more fragile. It is the balance of fear. Deterrence keeps nations armed to the teeth, and fear of destruction becomes the paradoxical glue holding civilization together. Leaders speak of diplomacy, of cooperation, of stability, but in the back rooms where real decisions are made, the truth is simpler. The only reason wars have not consumed us all is because the weapons of war are too catastrophic to use casually. The sword is never meant to be used, but it must always be sharpened. This balance was carved into history during the nuclear age, when the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki showed the world a new scale of devastation. Entire cities erased in moments, skies burned with light brighter than the sun, survivors carrying shadows of blast waves etched into their skin. Humanity had built something it could barely comprehend, and in doing so it created a new order. Possession of such weapons meant power, but use of them meant annihilation. Nations quickly learned that the weapons themselves became the deterrent. If you have them, others hesitate. If you do not, you are vulnerable. From that day forward, peace was maintained not by trust, but by terror. The Cold War made this principle explicit. Two superpowers faced each other across oceans, each holding arsenals large enough to destroy the planet many times over. Neither side could strike without inviting their own destruction. This was called mutually assured destruction, and while the term sounded absurd, it worked. No leader wanted to be the one who ended the world. Instead, they built more weapons, refined them, tested them, and displayed them as symbols of power. Each missile paraded through Red Square or launched from Cape Canaveral was not only a weapon, it was a message. We are ready, so you should never try. The paradox was clear. The more terrifying the weapons became, the less likely they were to be used. But deterrence is not only about nuclear warheads. It is about every weapon that creates hesitation in the mind of an enemy. Aircraft carriers patrolling contested seas, stealth bombers parked in hangars, armies trained and drilled to perfection. All of these serve as visible reminders that aggression will not go unanswered. Nations spend billions, not because they expect to fight tomorrow, but because they want others to believe that fighting them would be suicidal. The balance of fear is psychological as much as physical. It is a chess game played with pieces no one dares to move, but everyone must keep polishing. The balance is fragile. It depends on perception, on the belief that weapons will work as advertised, that leaders are willing to use them if pushed. If doubt creeps in, deterrence weakens. If an enemy thinks your sword is rusty, they may test you. If allies think your shield is fragile, they may abandon you. For deterrence to succeed, the weapons must not only exist, they must be seen, demonstrated, sharpened. This is why nations conduct military exercises, launch missiles into the sky, test new submarines, and reveal advanced fighter jets. These displays are not only about preparation, they are theater, reminders to the world that the balance of fear still holds. Yet the danger of deterrence is that it never allows rest. If your rival builds a new weapon, you must build one too. If they expand their arsenal, you expand yours. The arms race becomes perpetual, each side trapped in a cycle of fear that never resolves. Leaders may sign treaties to limit weapons, but suspicion always lingers. Is the other side truly complying? Are they hiding stockpiles underground? Are they preparing something new, something invisible? The balance of fear feeds paranoia, and paranoia feeds preparation. The sword must never be put away. Deterrence extends beyond nuclear weapons. into the digital and the invisible. Cyber warfare now joins the arsenal of fear. A nation capable of shutting down power grids or collapsing financial systems wields deterrence without firing a shot. Space-based weapons, satellites capable of blinding communication networks or disabling missile systems, also serve as silent threats. Even biological research, officially conducted for medicine, carries the shadow of deterrence if it could be weaponized. Every frontier of science becomes part of the balance, every breakthrough weighed for its ability to make others hesitate. The balance of fear also works through alliances. NATO, for example, declares that an attack on one member is an attack on all. The credibility of that promise is itself deterrence. Potential aggressors must calculate whether striking a small country might trigger a global response. But again, credibility depends on perception. If alliances weaken, deterrence weakens. If promises seem hollow, enemies may take risks they otherwise would not. The balance is a psychological contract, and once trust erodes, its stability begins to collapse. For citizens, this balance is mostly invisible, yet it shapes daily life. The taxes they pay fund arsenals they will never see. The news they watch shows military parades, missile tests, and speeches about strength, all part of the ongoing theater of deterrence. People may feel safe, but their safety rests on the knife's edge of fear, on the hope that no leader will be reckless, no system will malfunction, no calculation will be misjudged. Few pause to consider that the peace of their daily lives is preserved not by goodwill, but by the looming threat of destruction should anyone push too far. History reveals how close this balance has come to collapse. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stood on the brink, missiles loaded and ready, leaders staring into the abyss. One wrong move, one miscommunication, could have ended millions of lives. It was deterrence that held, but barely. In other moments, accidents nearly broke the balance. A false radar alert in the Soviet Union, a computer error in the United States, each nearly triggering retaliation before human judgment stepped in. The balance of fear depends not only on weapons, but on fallible people, and that may be its most dangerous weakness. Still, nations cling to it because no alternative seems viable. True disarmament feels impossible. Trust is too fragile, and so deterrence becomes the default, the unspoken agreement that keeps civilization intact. Every nation sharpens its sword, not because it wants to use it, but because to let it dull would invite challenge. The paradox is complete. Weapons too dangerous to fire are the very reason they must be kept ready. And so, the arsenals remain. Warheads sit in silos, missiles glide beneath oceans, jets wait on runways, cyber weapons sleep in servers, satellites orbit silently above. Leaders may speak of peace, but their budgets speak of preparation. Deterrence is the reality that defines this age. It is not trust that holds the world together, but fear. A fear so profound that it keeps the sword sharp, keeps the arsenals stocked, keeps nations awake at night, counting weapons, not because they will use them, but because they must never appear unready. The balance of fear is not peace. It is a pause, a hesitation, a delicate truce enforced by terror. And yet it has worked. So far, the world spins, nations prepare, weapons are sharpened but not unleashed. But no one can say how long the balance will hold, or what might happen if it fails. For now, humanity lives in the paradox. The sword is never meant to be used, but it must always be sharpened. You may imagine war as something distant, fought by soldiers in uniforms, commanded by generals in faraway bunkers, and broadcast as headlines on screens. But the truth is that preparation for conflict does not stop at the barracks or the armory. It seeps into civilian life, shaping the rhythms of daily existence in subtle and sometimes invisible ways. The civil front has always been part of war, whether openly acknowledged or quietly implied. Preparation isn't just for soldiers, it is for everyone. Citizens are reminded, sometimes gently, sometimes firmly, to stockpile food, harden homes, obey instructions, and above all, trust the state. Governments drill their people in silence, whispering what they rarely say aloud. Be ready, just in case. The idea is older than the modern world. In the ancient city-states, when war threatened, families gathered grain, salted meat, and fortified walls. Peasants carried their possessions behind castle gates, hoping stone and moat would shield them from fire and sword. In every century, civilians have always been enlisted, whether by law, by necessity, or by fear. In modern times, the civil front has grown even more essential. War is no longer only about battles on distant fields. It reaches into homes through missiles, drones, and cyber attacks. The distinction between soldier and civilian blurs, and preparation spreads across entire populations. During the world wars of the 20th century, governments perfected the art of mobilizing society. Posters urged citizens to conserve fuel, ration bread, grow victory gardens. Children collected scrap metal for ammunition. Women filled factories to produce tanks and planes. Sirens wailed as families scrambled into bomb shelters dug beneath city streets. Civil defense became as important as military offense. The civil front was not symbolic. It was survival. Without rationing, without production, without resilience at home, armies abroad would have faltered. Those lessons were never forgotten. Even in peacetime, nations continued to prepare. Civil defense manuals were printed, instructing citizens how to react in case of nuclear strike. Fallout shelters were mapped, sometimes built beneath schools or government buildings. Public service announcements taught children to duck and cover, a ritual that blurred the line between precaution and indoctrination. Entire generations grew up with the quiet knowledge that survival might depend not on soldiers alone, but on their own readiness to act. Today, those preparations are subtler, but they remain. Governments release quiet advisories about stocking emergency food and water. Citizens are urged to keep radios, flashlights, and first aid kits on hand. Some nations go further, distributing detailed pamphlets on how to respond if conflict reaches their neighborhoods. Trust the state, the message reads between the lines. We will tell you what to do when the time comes. These are not paranoid fantasies, but official reminders. Civil preparedness is as much a part of national defense as missiles and tanks. The threats themselves have evolved. Where once civilians prepared for bombs falling from the sky, now they must also prepare for cyber blackouts, poisoned water supplies, or biological attacks. A power grid failure may leave entire cities without light or heat in winter. A disruption in communication networks may isolate neighborhoods. A contaminated water source may spread panic faster than disease itself. And so governments quietly plan for these possibilities, creating emergency broadcast systems, stockpiling vaccines, and drafting instructions that can be delivered with the push of a button. Citizens are encouraged to be resilient, self-reliant, cooperative, but always under the assumption that the state will guide them through the worst. The civil front also extends to infrastructure. Roads are designed to carry tanks as well as trucks. Bridges are built strong enough to handle military convoys. Subways double as shelters, their tunnels capable of shielding thousands from airstrikes. Even architecture reflects this dual purpose. Hardened bunkers beneath government buildings, hidden supply depots, backup power plants, all part of a silent web of civilian defense. These measures are rarely advertised, but they are everywhere, waiting for a moment when normal life collapses into crisis. Fear is both a motivator and a tool. By reminding citizens of potential threats, governments ensure compliance, funding, and loyalty. Be prepared, the slogans say, and the words sound responsible, even patriotic. But beneath them lies a darker truth. Civilians are part of the battlefield whether they wish to be or not. They are expected to endure shortages, to obey curfews, to trust orders, and to contribute labor, money, and sometimes their lives to the cause of survival. The civil front is where ordinary people are transformed into silent soldiers, enlisted not by choice, but by circumstance. Propaganda supports this transformation. Movies, advertisements, and social media campaigns normalize readiness. In one country, citizens are urged to stockpile supplies for natural disasters, a message that doubles as preparation for war. In another, television dramas portray heroic civilians keeping calm during crises, subtly teaching audiences how they should act if reality ever mirrors fiction. School children rehearse evacuations, not told explicitly that they are practicing for war, but absorbing the lesson nonetheless. The civil front is maintained not only through logistics, but through imagination, through constant reminders that readiness is virtue and hesitation is weakness. There is also an economic side to this preparation. Citizens are told to continue spending, working, producing, even during times of crisis. Factories must stay open, markets must not collapse, supply chains must bend, but not break. Governments intervene to stabilize prices, ration essentials, and reassure populations that life can go on. In truth, maintaining civilian morale is as important as any battle won abroad. A society that fractures under pressure weakens its army. A society that holds together becomes a weapon in itself. The civil front, therefore, is not only about survival, but about demonstrating strength to enemies watching closely. Technology complicates the picture further. Social media spreads panic and misinformation faster than any siren. Governments now fight wars of perception as much as wars of supply. Citizens must be trained not only to stockpile food, but to resist propaganda, to trust official channels over viral rumors, to maintain faith in the state, even when lies swarm across their screens. In this sense, the civil front is psychological. It is about shaping minds, controlling narratives, and ensuring that unity outlasts fear. Enemies seek to divide, governments seek to bind. The battlefield is not just in streets or skies, but in conversations, timelines, and the quiet doubts of individuals. The responsibility placed on civilians can be crushing. Families must prepare to lose loved ones to conscription. Communities must prepare to host refugees. Entire populations must prepare to live under restrictions, curfews, rationing, censorship, all justified as necessary for survival. Some resist, questioning the endless emphasis on readiness. Others accept it as inevitable, a price of living in a dangerous world. But whether welcomed or resented, the civil front remains. It is the invisible shield that leaders insist must be held in place, even if no attack ever comes. History shows how powerful this front can be. London endured the Blitz because civilians were prepared to shelter, to rebuild, to carry on under bombardment. The Soviet Union survived its harshest years of war because civilians labored relentlessly in factories and fields, producing the supplies soldiers needed at the front. In every major conflict, armies could not have endured without the resilience of their populations. The civil front has always been decisive, even if it is rarely remembered in parades or monuments. Today, governments face the same reality. Soldiers may fight, but civilians must endure. Stockpiles of food and medicine are not luxuries, they are lifelines. Emergency broadcasts are not paranoia, they are insurance. Preparedness drills are not theatre, they are rehearsals. Citizens may roll their eyes at instructions to keep extra supplies or to learn evacuation routes, but when crisis comes, those small steps can mean survival. The civil front is not dramatic. It is not about glorious victories or famous generals. It is about patience, endurance, and obedience. It is about quiet sacrifice and hidden strength. It is about mothers standing in ration lines, children rehearsing air raid drills, workers producing materials they will never see used. It is about trust placed in institutions, sometimes earned, sometimes misplaced. Above all, it is about the recognition that in modern war there are no true civilians. Everyone is enlisted, whether they wear a uniform or not. And so the reminders continue. Governments urge citizens to prepare, to harden, to trust. They drill them in silence, whispering words they hope will never be tested. Be ready, just in case. The civil front is not temporary. It is permanent, woven into the structure of society itself. It is the hidden army that never marches, the shield that never rests, the quiet discipline that underpins the louder battles fought elsewhere. In the end, survival depends not only on weapons, but on people. The millions who prepare in silence, waiting, enduring, ready for a storm that may or may not come. You think of the word draft, and perhaps imagine young men lining up outside a military office, papers in hand, waiting to be told which base they'll report to and which uniform they'll wear. That was the draft of the past, obvious, public, heavy with parades and protests alike. But in the modern world, the draft has changed. It no longer needs to march openly down city streets. It hides in plain sight, threaded through the economy, the schools, the laboratories, even the taxes deducted from every paycheck. Conscription today is not always uniforms and barracks. It is something quieter, harder to resist, and harder even to notice. It is the invisible draft. Everyone is enlisted, whether they know it or not. Start with money. Wars are fought with steel and fire, but they are built on budgets. Every missile, every aircraft, every satellite launched into orbit exists because citizens fund it, directly or indirectly. Taxes funnel into defense budgets that climb higher year after year, billions and trillions allocated to keep the machinery of war humming. Citizens may imagine their taxes paying for roads, schools, and hospitals, and some of it does, but a staggering share vanishes into the silent coffers of defense. When a country increases military spending, it does not ask each taxpayer for permission. It simply drafts their earnings. In this way, every citizen, whether pacifist or soldier, becomes a financier of conflict. The invisible draft begins not with a signature, but with a deduction. Then come the industries. Modern militaries cannot function without vast networks of companies producing everything from body armor to satellites, from field rations to drones. Entire sectors of the economy bend toward defense contracts, shaping careers and innovations. An engineer who once dreamed of designing cleaner engines finds themselves working on jet turbines for fighter planes. A chemist who might have developed new medicines is redirected to study materials for explosives or armor plating. A software developer is recruited by a government agency to design code not for games or healthcare, but for surveillance and cyber warfare. These shifts are not always voluntary. They are incentives, contracts, opportunities too large to refuse. The invisible draft does not only take soldiers, it takes industries, bending them toward war. Science itself is conscripted. Laboratories that might have been devoted to curing diseases are steered toward missile guidance, drone technology, artificial intelligence for battlefield analysis. Governments pour funding into research with military applications, and in doing so, they guide the hands of scientists. A graduate student working on algorithms for image recognition may find their work adapted for drone targeting systems. A biologist studying pathogens may discover their funding comes with strings tied to biodefense projects. Even in the pursuit of knowledge, the shadow of war looms. Science is drafted, not by order, but by money, by contracts, by necessity. Education, too, plays its part. Students are encouraged to study fields that support national defense, engineering, cybersecurity, aerospace. Scholarships and fellowships are offered with military connections. Universities partner with defense agencies, shaping curricula that quietly feed into military pipelines. A young person may believe they are choosing their career freely, but the options available, the programs funded, the internships offered, all bend subtly toward the needs of national security. The invisible draft reaches into classrooms, steering the future workforce toward service in ways they may not even recognize until years later. Even culture is drafted. Movies, television, and games often glorify military service, funded indirectly by partnerships with defense departments. Propaganda is no longer just posters urging enlistment. It is woven into entertainment, shaping how citizens imagine war and their role in it. A blockbuster film that portrays soldiers as noble heroes may be partially funded by access to military equipment, provided in exchange for script approval. A video game designed to recruit interest in technology doubles as a training simulator. Culture becomes a recruitment tool, normalizing the idea that war is inevitable and that participation in some form is honorable. The invisible draft enlists not just bodies, but imaginations. And then there is the labor of ordinary citizens during crisis. In times of national emergency, civilians are expected to keep society running, to maintain supply chains, to accept rationing, to produce and consume in ways that support the war effort. Workers in factories, drivers on highways, farmers in fields, all become part of the machine. They are not called soldiers, but they are enlisted in the sense that their labor directly feeds the front lines. When governments encourage people to do their part, what they mean is that the invisible draft extends to everyone. The invisible draft also manifests in surveillance. Citizens are monitored in the name of security, their data collected, analyzed, and stored. Each phone call, email, or online search becomes part of a massive intelligence network. Whether they like it or not, citizens are participants in the state's information war, their privacy conscripted for the sake of defense. Few consent knowingly to this, but the draft is invisible for a reason. It does not ask permission, it assumes compliance. For smaller nations, the invisible draft often takes the form of economic alignment. When a powerful ally demands cooperation, industries are reshaped to supply that ally's military needs. Ports are expanded to host foreign fleets. Farmers are pressed to export food, not only for profit, but for strategic leverage. Workers are drafted not into armies, but into global supply chains designed for war readiness. Even neutral nations cannot fully escape. Their economies are tied to larger powers, and their people drafted into supporting wars they may not even agree with. The digital era makes this draft even more pervasive. In cyber warfare, entire populations become unwilling assets. A compromised personal computer may be absorbed into a botnet, unknowingly participating in attacks against another country's infrastructure. Social media users may spread disinformation crafted by foreign powers, enlisted without their knowledge in propaganda campaigns. Citizens are drafted through their own devices, their screens and keyboards turned into tools of invisible conflict. The invisible draft has no borders. It crosses oceans in seconds, enlisting anyone with an internet connection. This reality raises uncomfortable questions. If everyone is already enlisted in some form, through taxes, industries, science, education, culture, labor, surveillance, and digital networks, what does it mean to be a civilian anymore? The line between soldier and non-soldier blurs. In total war, it was said that entire societies mobilize. Today, Societies are mobilized even in peacetime, their daily lives feeding the machinery of deterrence and preparation. The invisible draft is not temporary, it is permanent. It ensures that no nation is ever entirely at rest, that every citizen contributes whether they are aware of it or not. Some resist. Activists call for divestment from defense industries, for universities to reject military funding, for surveillance to be curbed. But the invisible draft is difficult to escape because it is embedded in the structure of modern civilization. To pay taxes, to use technology, to study in schools, to consume media, these are not optional activities, and yet each one carries the potential to contribute to the next war. Resistance is possible only at the margins, and even then, the machine continues turning. History will likely remember this era, not only for its visible battles, but for its invisible enlistments. Entire populations serving without realizing, entire economies redirected toward conflict, even in times of supposed peace. Leaders speak of national unity, of shared responsibility, of resilience. What they rarely admit is that unity has been enforced, responsibility assumed, resilience demanded. The draft never ended. It simply became harder to see. So you live your life, buying groceries, paying bills, streaming movies, going to school or work, and all the while, threads of your effort are pulled into a larger fabric. The taxes you pay, the products you consume, the technologies you use, all support systems of power that prepare for war. You are not wearing a uniform. You may never touch a weapon, and yet you are enlisted. The invisible draft ensures that everyone serves, whether by choice or by default. In the end, that may be the most unsettling truth of all. The world looks calm on the surface. Trade continues, tourists travel, concerts fill stadiums. But beneath the noise, preparations grind on, a paradox of peace maintained by the readiness for war. You walk through a crowded marketplace, hear the sound of music drifting from an open cafe, watch tourists snapping photos in front of monuments, and it feels like peace is permanent. Trains run on time, planes cross continents, and sports stadiums roar with cheering crowds. People fall in love, start families, build careers, and make plans for futures that stretch decades into the horizon. On the surface, the world looks calm, stitched together by trade, travel, and the daily rhythm of ordinary life. Yet beneath this calm beats another rhythm, one not spoken about openly but always present. Preparations grind on in silence, armies train in remote bases, satellites scan the skies, defense budgets expand, and weapons are tested in deserts and oceans. It is a paradox as old as civilization. Peace is maintained not by trust, but by readiness for war. The illusion of peace is seductive because it allows people to live without the constant weight of fear. Governments encourage this illusion because societies function best when citizens feel safe enough to go to work, spend money, and raise children. Leaders assure their people that diplomacy is strong, that borders are secure, that the future is bright. Yet behind closed doors, those same leaders sit with generals and strategists, reviewing plans for conflicts that might erupt at any moment. In public, they smile and speak of cooperation. In private, they count missiles and measure readiness. This duality is everywhere. International trade flourishes, with goods crisscrossing the globe on ships and planes, but many of those same trade routes are guarded by navies prepared to fight at a moment's notice. Tourism brings millions to foreign cities, while governments quietly monitor those visitors for espionage or terrorism. Concerts and festivals draw crowds by the tens of thousands, while police stand ready to respond not only to accidents, but to attacks. Peace feels natural, but it is supported by constant vigilance, a hidden scaffolding of preparation that citizens rarely see. The paradox grows sharper when you consider history. Almost every great war began in a time that felt stable. In the summer of 1914, Europe was connected by trade, alliances, and culture. Crowds filled theatres and opera houses, newspapers spoke of progress, and many believed the continent was too civilized for war. Weeks later, trenches scarred the land, and millions were dead. In the late 1930s, families across Europe still attended football matches and fairs, even as factories quietly retooled for weapons production. On the eve of the Cold War, Americans bought homes in suburbs while their government built nuclear silos under farmland. The illusion of peace has always been most convincing in the moments just before it shatters. Today is no different. Trade deals are signed, summits are broadcast, and leaders assure their citizens that cooperation is strong. Yet the same nations that sign agreements also fund armies, modernize weapons, and conduct war games. A handshake at a conference does not erase the submarines patrolling beneath the seas, the missiles hidden in forests, or the cyber weapons waiting inside servers. The illusion of peace is maintained precisely because the machinery of war never stops turning. Citizens are part of this illusion, sometimes willingly. People want to believe in peace because the alternative is unbearable. They want to think of vacations and careers, not of missiles and blackouts. They accept the official narrative that war is unlikely, that enemies are distant, that stability is permanent. Governments feed this belief, knowing that constant fear would paralyze economies and societies. Yet those same governments quietly advise stockpiling supplies, investing in defense, and preparing for emergencies. The message is contradictory but intentional. Live as though peace is permanent, but prepare as though war could come tomorrow. Infrastructure reflects this dual reality. Highways are built wide enough for tanks as well as trucks. Subways double as shelters. Communication networks are hardened against attacks, even while being used for daily entertainment. Satellites beam television and internet to billions, but those same satellites are designed to guide missiles and track enemy movements. Every part of modern life is dual use, serving civilian needs in peace and military needs in war. Citizens enjoy the benefits without realizing how much of it is shaped by preparation for conflict. The economy too hides the machinery of readiness. A thriving technology industry produces smartphones, computers, and medical devices, but many of the same companies also produce components for drones, surveillance systems, or advanced weapons. Factories that manufacture cars can be converted to build armored vehicles. Pharmaceutical labs that develop vaccines also research biodefense. The global economy wears the mask of peace, but behind it is an invisible draft where industries bend toward defense. Every transaction contributes to a system that quietly funds both prosperity and preparation. Even culture carries the paradox. Movies and television tell stories of peace, progress, and optimism, but they also churn out tales of espionage, conflict, and apocalyptic wars. Video games let players simulate battles in faraway lands, blurring the line between entertainment and military training. Social media floods with images of festivals and memes, but it also becomes a battlefield for disinformation and propaganda campaigns. The illusion of peace is not only maintained by silence, it is reinforced by narratives that normalize conflict as background noise, something that can be entertained away until it suddenly erupts. Diplomacy itself is theater within the illusion. Summits are staged with flags, speeches, and photographs designed to project harmony. Yet behind the scripted gestures lies calculation. Nations cooperate because it is useful, not because it is permanent. They sign treaties with one hand while funding armies with the other. The illusion of peace depends on this theater. Citizens see the smiles and conclude that stability is secure, even while diplomats themselves know that negotiations are fragile pauses, not guarantees. The illusion also thrives on distance. Wars elsewhere are framed as regional conflicts, disconnected from everyday life in stable countries. Citizens in wealthy nations see footage of battles in deserts or jungles and believe that such chaos could never reach their neighborhoods. They go to work, attend concerts, plan vacations, convinced that peace at home is unshakable. Yet global supply chains, cyber networks, and alliances ensure that no conflict remains isolated for long. What begins as distant chaos often ripples outward, raising prices, disrupting trade, and drawing new nations into the fire. The illusion of peace rests on the hope that distance will protect, even when history proves it rarely does. The greatest danger of this illusion is complacency. When people believe peace is permanent, they fail to notice the signs of preparation all around them. They do not question why defense budgets rise each year, why nations test missiles in remote seas, why cyber attacks on infrastructure increase in frequency. They accept official explanations that these are routine, normal, unconnected to any real danger. They do not realize that preparation itself is evidence that peace is fragile. The sword is sharpened daily, not because it will be used tomorrow, but because it might be needed the day after. And yet, the paradox holds. It may be precisely this constant preparation that prevents wars from breaking out on a larger scale. Nations hesitate to strike when they know their rivals are armed, ready, and vigilant. Deterrence, as unsettling as it is, may be the very thing that allows citizens to live under the illusion of peace. Concerts can fill stadiums, tourists can cross borders, trade can flourish, because generals are watching, weapons are waiting, and governments are calculating. It is not trust that maintains peace, it is fear, discipline, and readiness. For individuals, this truth is almost unbearable, which is why it remains largely hidden. To live daily life under the constant awareness of looming war would be paralyzing. To function, people must believe in peace, even if it is an illusion. They must believe that tomorrow will be like today, that their children can grow up safely, that vacations can be planned months in advance. The illusion is necessary for society to function, but it is also dangerous because it blinds populations to the fragility of their security. The paradox is timeless. Ancient Rome enjoyed festivals and markets, even as legions trained relentlessly. Medieval kingdoms celebrated feasts, while their knights polished swords. The illusion of peace has always allowed people to live normal lives, while their rulers prepared for conflict. Today's version is simply more complex, hidden beneath digital networks, global trade, and technological marvels. But the principle is the same. Peace is never as secure as it seems. You live in this paradox every day. You watch concerts streamed live while cyber attacks probe power grids. You book vacations while fighter jets scramble in contested airspace. You scroll through social media while disinformation campaigns try to sway your opinions. You walk through streets lit by neon signs, unaware that underground bunkers sit stocked with supplies, waiting for a crisis. The illusion of peace surrounds you, comforts you, sustains you. But beneath the noise, preparations grind on. The illusion may hold for years, even decades. But history warns that it cannot hold forever. At some point, words may fail, deterrence may falter, miscalculations may escalate. When that happens, citizens will look back on the festivals, the markets, the concerts, and realize they were living in the fragile pause before the storm. The illusion of peace is not false. It is real enough to sustain daily life. But it is also temporary, dependent on the endless readiness for war that hums beneath the surface. And as long as nations sharpen their swords in silence, peace will always be a paradox. maintained by preparation, defined by fear, and one misstep away from collapse. You look up at the night sky and see stars, satellites tracing faint arcs across the darkness, and perhaps you imagine the heavens as a place of wonder, untouched by conflict. You stand by the shore and watch waves rolling endlessly onto the beach, believing the ocean to be eternal and neutral, a space for trade, exploration, and mystery. Yet both realms, space above and seas below, are no longer sanctuaries. They are the new frontiers of war. These places most people never see are already being mapped, claimed, and prepared as battlefields. In the next great conflict, it may not be armies in cities or tanks across plains that decide outcomes, but satellites blinded in orbit and cables severed in the deep. Space has always carried a certain myth of peace. For decades, humanity framed it as the realm of exploration, astronauts shaking hands in orbit, international cooperation on space stations. Children were taught to see it as the next step in progress, a frontier of science and imagination. But the reality is far sharper. From the moment satellites were first launched, they became tools of war. They were eyes in the sky, watching missile silos, tracking troop movements, guiding bombers. They were communication relays, connecting generals to armies across oceans. They were not only symbols of exploration, but also instruments of power. Today, satellites are woven into every strand of modern warfare, guiding drones, coordinating fleets, delivering intelligence in real time. To disable them is to cripple an enemy's ability to fight. And so the heavens have become contested. Nations test weapons capable of destroying satellites with missiles, lasers, or even smaller satellites designed to ram and disable their targets. These tests are often justified as experiments, but their meaning is clear. No satellite is safe. Debris from such strikes litters the orbits, a silent warning that war in space is no longer a possibility, but a practice. Militaries quietly build doctrines for space combat, training officers to think not only about air, land, and sea, but about orbits, trajectories, and orbital denial. The sky above is no longer just for stargazing. It is a battlefield waiting to ignite. The danger is not only in open attacks, but in subtle interference. Jamming signals, spoofing data, or disabling satellites without creating visible destruction are already routine tactics. A nation may wake to find its GPS unreliable, its communications scrambled, its reconnaissance blind. These disruptions may not even be attributed clearly to an enemy, allowing nations to strike without admitting they have struck. In space, as in cyber warfare, attribution is murky, deniability strong. The new frontier is as much about shadows as it is about fire. Beneath the oceans, another hidden frontier stretches. Few people realize how much of modern life depends on fragile strands of fiber optic cable laid along the ocean floor. These cables, thinner than a garden hose, carry the majority of the world's internet traffic, financial markets, global communications, military commands, all pulse along these invisible veins beneath the waves. To sever them is to cripple economies, to silence nations, to blind militaries. Submarines and specialized drones already map and monitor these cables, both to protect their own and to prepare to cut their rivals in a time of war. It is a battlefield hidden in darkness, silent and lethal. Navies are no longer just about ships on the surface. Submarines prowl at depths where detection is nearly impossible, carrying missiles capable of striking continents. Autonomous underwater vehicles scout the seabed, searching not only for mines or enemy vessels, but for the cables that keep the world connected. In times of peace, these activities are described as exploration or defense, but the truth is clear. The oceans are being prepared as battlefields. Wars of the future may be decided not by land campaigns, but by which nation controls the invisible lines of communication beneath the sea. Control of the seas has always meant control of power. Ancient empires rose and fell based on their navies. Modern history proved again and again that shipping lanes and straits are choke points of immense importance. But now the sea is more than a surface. It is layered. Above, where carriers and destroyers patrol. Below, where cables and submarines define strategy. A single act of sabotage deep beneath the ocean could paralyze entire economies, leaving populations unaware of why their internet, their markets, their communications failed overnight. The ocean, vast and silent, becomes a stage for invisible war. The irony is that most citizens never see these frontiers. They look at the sky and think of exploration. They look at the ocean and think of trade or leisure. They cannot see satellites being weaponized or cables stretching across seabeds. This invisibility makes these battlefields even more dangerous. Wars fought in space and undersea may not announce themselves with explosions in cities or columns of smoke. They may begin with silence, with outages, with confusion. By the time populations realize war has begun, the decisive blows may already have been struck in realms they never imagined mattered. These new frontiers also raise new dilemmas. International law lags behind. Treaties meant to keep space peaceful are outdated, written in a time before private companies launched rockets weekly or nations tested anti-satellite missiles. Agreements governing the seas exist, but are ignored when strategic advantage demands it. The rules are unclear, and in war, unclear rules mean escalation. Nations test limits, pushing boundaries, daring rivals to respond. The new frontiers are fragile, unregulated, and ripe for conflict. Technology intensifies these tensions. Satellites grow smaller, cheaper, easier to launch in swarms. Instead of a few large satellites, nations deploy constellations of thousands, overwhelming the ability of rivals to track or destroy them all. Undersea drones grow more autonomous, able to operate for months without human control, mapping seabeds and testing defenses. Artificial intelligence monitors both space and sea, spotting anomalies faster than human eyes ever could. Every breakthrough opens new possibilities for defense and for attack. The frontier is no longer a distant horizon. It is immediate, evolving every day and shaping how wars may be fought tomorrow. Consider the possibility of a future war fought primarily in silence. The first move is not a missile strike or a tank advance, but the sudden failure of satellite networks. GPS falters, drones fall from the sky, planes lose navigation. At the same time, undersea cables are severed in strategic locations, cutting off internet access for entire regions. Banks fail, markets panic, militaries struggle to coordinate. Civilians wake to a world that seems intact on the surface, streets still standing, cities still lit. But beneath that surface, the nervous system of civilization has been cut. No bombs have fallen, no buildings destroyed, and yet the war is already raging. This is the future nations prepare for, whether they admit it openly or not. Defense budgets quietly allocate billions for space command centers, for undersea monitoring systems, for fleets of drones that will never be seen by the public. Politicians speak of peace and stability while approving contracts for technologies designed to fight wars in places most citizens never think about. The new frontiers are not celebrated because to celebrate them would mean admitting that peace is fragile, that the calm of daily life rests on contests unfolding far above and far below. And yet, this preparation continues because no nation dares to fall behind. To neglect satellites is to risk blindness in battle. To neglect undersea cables is to risk being silenced. Every power knows this, and so the race accelerates. Rockets rise weekly, not only to launch commercial satellites, but to expand military capabilities. Submarines deploy, not only for patrol, but for surveillance of hidden infrastructure. Companies that build rockets, satellites, and undersea technology profit, their research fueling both civilian progress and military readiness. The frontier is not separate from daily life. It underpins it. The seas and the skies above remind us of how fragile our systems truly are. A single strike in orbit could unleash debris that cripples entire networks. A single cut cable could silence millions. These vulnerabilities are why militaries view the frontiers as decisive. If you control the unseen, you control the visible. If you hold the sky and the seabed, you hold the battlefield before it ever erupts on land. For citizens, the illusion of peace hides this reality. They use GPS without thinking of the satellites that make it possible. They send emails and stream movies without considering the cables beneath oceans carrying those signals. They see space exploration as adventure, not as preparation for war. They see the sea as leisure, not as a contested realm. Yet whether visible or not, these frontiers are shaping the future. The wars to come may be decided not by soldiers storming cities, but by satellites falling from orbit, by cables cut in the depths, by silence where once there was connection. The new frontiers of space and the seas are not untouched anymore. They are mapped, monitored, weaponized, and prepared. Nations whisper strategies behind closed doors. Generals draw plans. Engineers build systems that civilians will never know exist. And when the day comes that words fail and deterrence collapses, these frontiers will no longer be silent. They will decide wars before most people even realize the battle has begun. You walk through a city and see skyscrapers shining in the sun, cars weaving through traffic, children playing in parks, couples laughing in cafes. On the surface, life feels ordinary, as if the world is stable and the future secure. But beneath this rhythm of normalcy lies an unspoken truth. Every stockpile, every drill, every silent maneuver unfolding in deserts, oceans, and skies is a reminder. The price of preparation is not only measured in dollars or rubles or yuan. It is measured in lives yet to be lost, in futures yet to be broken, in the quiet acceptance that all of this preparation means that one day the weapons may actually be used. This is the human cost yet to come, and it lingers in the shadows of every military exercise, every defense budget, every treaty signed with one hand and undermined with the other. Preparation feels abstract, tanks parked in hangars, missiles hidden in silos, satellites orbiting above. But the end of that preparation, the reason for all of it, is not abstract at all. It is flesh and blood. It is the possibility that cities may burn, that families may be torn apart, that entire generations may carry scars. Nations pretend that preparation ensures peace, but history warns us otherwise. Preparation may delay war, it may deter war, but it never erases it. Eventually, someone gives the order, and the drills become reality. The human cost is not a vague concept. It begins with the soldiers, young men and women pulled from ordinary lives into uniforms. They are trained to be ready, their bodies hardened, their instincts reshaped, their futures mortgaged to the needs of the state. Some will never come home, others will come back, but changed, carrying trauma, haunted by what they saw, what they did, what they lost. Behind every drill that sharpens their skills lies the knowledge that they are being prepared for battles that may cost them their lives. Their families endure the waiting, the letters that may never arrive, the knock on the door that every parent dreads. But the cost extends far beyond the battlefield. Civilians, too, are drafted into war in invisible ways. They live near power plants that may become targets, in cities that may be shelled, along borders that may be crossed. They will face blackouts, shortages, evacuations, and displacements. Refugee camps will fill with mothers clutching children, with the elderly left behind by collapsed systems. Every stockpile of grain, every hidden bunker of medicine is not just preparation for defense. It is acknowledgement that ordinary people will one day need to survive amid destruction. The unspoken contract of modern life is this: governments build arsenals because they expect, even if they never say it aloud, that one day civilians will bleed. The human cost is also generational. When weapons are used, the damage outlasts the battles. Children grow up with missing parents, with rubble for playgrounds, with silence where schools once stood. Traumas are inherited, not only through memory, but through economic collapse, through poverty, through displacement. Wars fought for resources, influence, or deterrence leave behind legacies of despair that ripple for decades. The drills and stockpiles you see today are not simply for survival. They are investments in futures where survival itself may come at the expense of stability, education, and peace for entire generations. Consider the cost of nuclear preparation. Nations speak of deterrence, of weapons that prevent wars through fear. Yet every missile stored is a reminder of potential annihilation. Every upgrade to warheads and delivery systems is a quiet acceptance that someone, someday, might actually use them. The human cost of such a strike is beyond calculation. Millions dead in minutes, survivors poisoned by radiation, entire regions rendered uninhabitable. Yet nations continue to build, test, and refine. They do this not because they expect to use them casually, but because they believe the threat itself maintains peace. The paradox is chilling. To preserve stability, humanity accepts the possibility of destruction, and that possibility is always human in its consequence. The human cost is not only in lives lost, but in trust eroded. Children raised under constant drills, under reminders to stockpile food, under sirens warning of possible attacks, carry a weight that never fully leaves. Even if bombs never fall, they live in a world that whispers daily, "War is coming, be ready." That readiness steals innocence, reshapes culture, and ingrains fear into the foundation of societies. To prepare for war is to normalize the expectation of war, and in that normalization lies a psychological toll as deep as any physical wound. Money, too, carries a hidden human price. Every dollar spent on defense is a dollar not spent on schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. Leaders argue that defense ensures survival, but survival without growth is a hollow victory. Societies sacrifice opportunities in the name of security. Scientists are diverted from curing diseases to designing weapons. Engineers are drawn away from sustainable energy projects to build stealth aircraft. Citizens live in a world where their taxes maintain arsenals instead of repairing bridges or funding education. The human cost of preparation includes not only the lives that may be lost in war, but the lives that never reach their full potential because resources are funneled into the machinery of conflict. The cost is also environmental, and that too is human in the end. Every missile test scars the atmosphere. Every naval exercise disrupts ecosystems. Every destroyed city leaves behind toxins, rubble, and poisoned soil. The world's natural systems, already fragile, suffer under the weight of preparation for destruction. And when the environment is damaged, it is people who suffer most, through hunger, disease, displacement, and disaster. The cost of preparation, therefore, is not confined to battlefields. It touches every forest, river, and ocean, rippling back into the lives of communities that depend on them. History shows us these costs with clarity. After every great conflict, survivors speak of starvation, of loss, of trauma. They rebuild, but scars remain. And yet, even as they rebuild, nations prepare again, as if repeating the cycle is inevitable. The drills resume, The stockpiles grow, the budgets expand. Each generation tells itself that preparation will prevent the next catastrophe, even as each generation seems destined to face one. The cost is never avoided, only postponed. Perhaps the most haunting part of this truth is the silence around it. Governments rarely admit openly that preparation for war means readiness to sacrifice lives. They speak, instead of security, of deterrence, of responsibility. They avoid acknowledging the simple reality. Every weapon built carries with it the promise of human suffering, if ever unleashed. Citizens live under this silence, comforted by the illusion of peace, but paying daily into systems that expect them to endure the consequences. The human cost is kept out of sight, but it is always waiting. And so you look again at the city streets, at the children playing, at the couples laughing, at the traffic lights blinking red and green. It all feels so secure. Yet above, satellites track potential enemies. Beneath, submarines patrol. In distant deserts, soldiers drill. In bunkers, missiles sit ready. Every smile, every plan, every dream unfolds under the shadow of preparation. The cost of that preparation is not measured today, but tomorrow. It is not felt in this moment, but in some moment yet to come. The weapons wait, and with them waits the price. The human cost yet to come is the unspoken heart of every budget, every drill, every maneuver. It is the acceptance that peace is never guaranteed, that survival requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice, when the time comes, will not be abstract. It will be human, measured in lives interrupted, in futures erased, in scars carried forward. Until then, the world continues its daily rhythm, trading, traveling, laughing, planning, all the while knowing, even if it will not say it aloud, that beneath the calm lies a readiness for destruction, and that readiness carries a price that one day someone will pay.